All right, this is called The Spoken War, and this is a writing and is a continuation of The Silent War, which outline and explain some of the initial stages and experiences I've had in my sub layers of deprogramming involving genealogies, MK Ultra, and SRA, and into the sub projects. This continuation is outlining a deeper layer of those traumas, and now I have separated the timelines and blending of an almost virtual false reality zone with an organic based reality that identified as me in my life. It's my intention to help the average person or those involved in these ancient practices to understand the complexities of the war that happened in heaven that was brought on earth between the sons of light and the sons of darkness and how it still affects this realm today. I wasn't born to accept a false reality existence, but brought here as a high frequency operating multidimensional soul being to clear miasms, stop cycles of abuse, lift others up to higher levels, and bring glory back to the Father in heaven, that is the creator of all life and all things, and who's the beginning and the end. The technology that's been used on those incarnated here is 100 years beyond what the public community knows, so it's hard to scientifically or metaphysically, quantumly describe in a way that most people can wrap their minds around. Because it's easy for people to dismiss, ignore, avoid, or attack what they don't understand. So the only way anyone would know if any of this is true is by the revelation of the Holy Spirit and the means, and that's the only means by which I have obtained these memories. Because the Lord will meet you when you cry out to Him. He'll bring you to places you never thought you could go. He'll show you the incomprehensible in a way that your mind can understand. And in my case, He slowly brought down certain walls that were necessary for my own spiritual growth in a loving manner to show me some humor along with them so I could sanely and rationally process these memories. Because memory bleed through is it's not very pleasant, but the way the mind safely processes data to be sifted and analyzed and cleared. It's surfacing of unconscious levels of your own existence that have been dormant or latent for sometimes decades, but it also involves raw energy that has, touched hellish domains and carries with it sometimes black dianetics, hypersexualization attached to those engrams, and whatever else is in your bag that surfaces. But the Lord knows how much He can handle, and He knows our inner depths to the hairs on our heads, back to the pre-existence, even to the very souls He stood in the midst of in the congregation of the mighty. He was sensing what souls would honor Him and those that wouldn't. It's like having a string of recurring dreams you thought you that were dreams that come together in a coherent picture of watercolors, and then your world makes more sense. Things you felt, and then usually an emotional release follows. So my life stages happened the way it did to bring about the next chapters and phases in a way that I could function and then overlay concepts and what I had learned in an integrative yet somehow what whitewashed fashion. I've always known there was so much more to these memories, and I'm probably only have a third because when your mind's been wiped and cleaned and scrubbed so many times, you still just get a fraction of things that are called up again or what resurfaces. So I'm writing this to be a warning in the end times that Montauk was a monster in itself and how it grew from the Rainbow Project and was the world's most clandestine project in its beginnings, and how it grew tentacles like Hydra involving the eyes of all intelligence agencies is a book in itself. It remained in an area and zone of space and time that no one ever saw somehow. I could never figure out how they were keeping us in that null and upside down horror reality zone, or how to get out for that matter. I wish I could explain it scientifically in a way that all could understand, but I can't even. And even the top programmers can't because they were the most programmed themselves. Some helped in our programming, so we can't trust them either. We just get chunks and pieces of the ordeal when you compare notes or go to sites and places and um, other information when we have contact with one another. So, and Montauk was a name that none of us ever knew. We were never shown anything with the name on it. And the one time I was taken by a handler into Long Island, it was also done in a way that I never saw the word Montauk. I wasn't supposed to read any words anywhere and kept my eyes down. So Montauk involved many sub-projects, and it spread worldwide into major cities with people being shuffled around all the time so no one ever knew where they were. Um, we were in the hands of basic serial killers. If millions went through and a certain percentage was chosen from genetics mainly and others never survived, that still is a staggering number of those affected and those that were sent back into the populace, an army, in fact. This is, in my opinion, is a project that never stopped. It's still ongoing, even at the main site, since there's new telephone wires and cables going into the ground, and most of all, it's still blocked off, and there's still lights on, and it's inaccessible. There's fake fishermen. People get chased out. There's a lot of weird things that still happen there. There's phantom pulses emanating into a long band width range, and so on. So there's also still a type of some orgonite bombs that are planted all over the park, and they strongly warn anyone that no signal is ever allowed in the park or you could explode. So this is highly unusual for a public park and leisure area, which it's the exact opposite of. And it's a straight up death camp. Any humans working there, I'd be highly suspicious of as well. Young U.S. Coastal Guard tried to eat a couple last year, and phenomena like that once in a while randomly happens. It's not a normal place, but people need to understand the magnanimity and plain weirdness of Montauk. It's a place that ripped pockets out of space and time and rifts and many other things. You know, it's like taking a tour of the ship in Philadelphia experiment, wondering if something's going to come crawling out of the woodwork. CERN is a different kind of animal, but it does use some of the data and information that was calibrated in its calculations through the Nazi scientists that were running the show. Those of us that were chosen for it were literally dealing with the worst Nazi criminals this world has ever seen. So just think about that and how a child would process that. It was literally like being thrown to the wolves and someone throwing away the key. Or so they wanted to give us that illusion. We falsely accepted what their reality consisted of and paid the price for it later in life. Hitler never died, and the Nazis were brought to America through Project Paperclip through the Air Force, on which the Montauk Project hung its ugly head on. The Nazis only perfected everything they had set out to do through the Montauk Project and the continuation of the Fourth Reich, whose headquarters are in Denver and de facto locale DC, District of Columbia, named after the goddess Columbia, and a country to itself. So you can trace money trails back to there, into the lowlands, into the Netherlands, if you look deep enough. And they even learned that the DC currents worked more effectively without harm than the AC currents. But everything done there was through private interest groups, funneled through corporations' administrative bank accounts that only the Federal Reserve would have access to. And there's currently being employed a callback program of Montauk. They instilled many future triggers and codings within us, along with frequencies that we'd be able to recognize later in life if we carried the Montauk signature. They cataloged all of our DNA, drained us like batteries that offered to give us their lifeless energy in exchange for us to keep living, then mapped us out so well that they could make us sick easily, took stem cells from us and other vital birth signatures. Took something out of my spinal cord, I think. Um, as well as tracking devices. And even into my 20s, the Nazis still followed me, and a lot of the children chosen were from the lines of the Nazi Party. The deeper objectives of the programming was to have a callback at a certain time period, as they were hell-bent on mind controlling the world for a Black Awakening to happen at some point in time. This would activate prior training and priorly implanted nanites to activate not just as a Manchurian candidate type program, or random shootings to take away guns, but for the regime militia to be able to take over the current U.S. government structure. Parts of this came from, think clubs like Clubs of Rome. That black sun is called Abaddon, and that's a false light that tried to replace the glory within us and the glory of the Shekinah, where we have the indwelling. They need to silence that, suffocate it, and shut the angelic realm up to be able to do what they do here. So they wanted to have many choice spirits on total lockdown. So this allowed the Black Corps, Sons of Belial, thule, vril, SS trained moguls to have their version of reality played out in the mainstream scene. They had contact with many dark places, so the light that was called Black Sunshine was actually emanating through the middle of Montauk itself. You could see like a green light signature around. It was a subtle black sunlight everywhere. This also set the stage from the PSYOPs, corrupt legislations, high courts of Pennsylvania, hybridization, chimera-like underground lab successes to someday surface above the ground when they pass bills and laws secretly overnight, or to look this way when you don't see what the other hand of the government is doing. Basically, the people running the Montauk program worked for Satan and wanted to further his army as the Führer did, but we all know that the timelines can change, and that is just one reality that also can be changed and overthrown. The monsters they created within us, in the end, ended up consuming them and turning on the creators of the twisted delusions. The souls that overrode the programming of Montauk are the ones who came here meaning business and knew that it would not succeed. All the fine tuning of all the experimentations went from base physical access torture like scenarios into a finer tuned electronic digitized form of mind hacking that was perfected nowadays, and they can access a person in about 5 minutes. Montauk was the head of a snake pit that will be burned out one day, but its reality and what it did needs to be spoken of so that the fallen soldiers of it and the countless victims' lives that it took, like a death camp, can be acknowledged, remorsed, and put to rest. There are many areas in the world where genocide has been covered up, not one country guiltless of major atrocities involving crimes against humanity, but America's bloodied hands have those hands in all of the world's pockets, it appears, to some extent, and what you reap you sow. America was blessed and had many good people and things come about it and freedoms, but many know that its demise is imminent. So I pray that a remnant will be spared in every state, city, town, village, and even to every small family. And it is only God Himself that knows if you will be spared and where your heart is, and if you truly know Him. It doesn't matter if you think God knows you and that's enough. It'll be important in these days to ask yourself, do I really know who God is, and is my walk sufficient for Him and not the other way around? Don't be of this world. It is a miracle in itself that through the vigorous and laborious self-serving indoctrination day after day, that those that came out still serving heaven and loving God, which is very few, made it out as their original self, retaining that pure, simple knowledge that all life is precious to God, and He has shown us who is His enemies and who is not. The forms of life that this comes in is the question. Many beings were created before the war in heaven, and there are still phoenixes, six-winged angels, celestials, as well as giants, since everything was bigger back then in the beginning that didn't fall, and in whose vibration and song is sung directly back as praises to the Most High. They are still on the throne. Now the rebel angels who were cast down to the pit, to them Tiamat, the watery planet, was where Hashem shut them up in and placed the foundations of the world upon. It is a miracle that my mind was healed through all of this, and that healing only came directly to me from on high. Because these beings affected many realms. They have a long, convoluted history of doing this. So, yeah, Montauk was like the head of a snake pit. These other beings, okay, from the time of the antediluvian civilization, they have traces throughout the planets and stars, which are luminaries and intelligences. They have nests, so to speak, in these celestial areas, and they can only manipulate the celestial. Above the firmament is the levels of heaven and celestial area. They're subjected to time and space as humans are, and they only rely on the celestial realms and their skewed astrological calendars to superimpose a prognosticated future for themselves instead of serving mankind or heaven. They already lost their first estate. Mars, Marduk, represents the third heaven where Lucifer fell to, as well as infecting Spica, Lyra, and many other areas. Revelations talks about the nesting of beings in the stars and how those stars will fall like figs, since this is the fig generation, and that will start the burning process. Adam and Eve made fig leaves and covered their private parts with them as the first Masonic aprons to cover up their shame of their first sin natures. The elect are being gathered currently, and I hope that they hear the clarion call, Gabriel's horn, to come back to the All-Father and remember who they are and what their missions really are. And all the original lie has done and hooked itself into, and the false doctrines and theologies, is a thorn not only in mankind's side, but especially in the Lord's side. And he wishes all to remove it and the delusion that you are gods and can ascend yourselves without him. He gave this world his only begotten Son, his word made flesh, the door that the plan of salvation and redemption for the human race needs to go through. So please don't forsake it and listen to the enemy, whose goal is to keep you as far away from that primordial ancient truth as possible by confusing and deluding your mind with other ways, other things, most of all thoughts not held captive by the quickening mind of the Ruach HaKodesh. There's only one path and only one way through the Messiah, the ultimate good gift this world has ever known and rejected, but not only rejected, but what the ultimate evil here murdered, as if to rebel in Hashem's face again and replace their own face with the face of God. No one's sovereign but the sovereign Lord, and you can't create a version of yourself out of thin air. Those who believe the strong delusion are the ones who don't love truth. They are lovers of themselves. Yeshua only lived for God, and he asked us to take up our cross and follow him, to imitate the Father, to be like him. He didn't say it's okay to serve yourselves and say your own path is the way. You're trampling over the blood of the Son of God who sacrificed himself for you so you could know the Father again when you do this. And when you stand before the great white judgment seat, which is right above our heads dimensionally, you will regret every breath you've ever taken that wasn't directed back at Yahuwah, who is the only thing who can protect your DNA. It's not to be taken lightly, and all the creation hangs on the word. And he can shake everything off the face of this earth in a heartbeat, but he doesn't because he is full of mercy, grace, and kindness, and let this whole thing play out to the end of the age so that people could come to an understanding of his nature and what this world was made for and what it means. No one goes directly to heaven when they die, but only to paradise, to be separated until judgment, which is like a floating island. Judgment has not happened yet. If you are counted as one of the righteous, you will be judging the fallen angels. The Lord is not to be mocked, and his word is not a fairy tale. He left us everything we need here to walk with him again, and it's your choice if you want to choose life or death. People are so muddled in their own psychic debris they can't even recognize simple truths or his voice anymore. The people that choose to stay programmed and call his word a lie will be the ones that will only hear a signal and not recognize his voice in the end. Just like the robot beings I saw at Montauk, whose only life purpose was to answer to a signal, this will be those people being led to be cut off from the body of Christ eternally. We are subjected to time, not the workings of heaven. They don't need to be subjected to time. On an occasion, a higher being like an angel will incarnate, but God himself is not subjected to what we are. He's above space and time. It's a blink of an eye in his time, and who are we to determine if our time's up when it gets too hard? There's no outer space but inner space, the great deep. It's all in the dome and the reflections of the pit, reflections of degrees of illuminations and angles under the heavenly firmament and circuitries within, all reflecting the nature of God and coming to see ourselves for what we are and where we are in contrast to the singleness of our eye with the glory of God. All that we interfaced with, battled, and overcame with the many visitors of Montauk were just interdimensionals that have been here since the garden. The ones with fire gourds that invaded the garden, made Adam and Eve fall from paradise, that floating island that sent them into the hollow of the tree, down to the cave of treasures, and then into the tangible 3D experiences that they learned to walk through with their new bodies. We're freed from their sin, not from the death spiral that happened after the fall, and need to take responsibility for our own natures and life cycles here that has set us on a stage for our own spiritual growth. There are many other pockets of this earth terrarium than what our maps show. Tops of pyramids or tops of ancient obelisks going deep in the earth that were holographic Atlantean libraries in the Pan Zion, counterfeit heavenly mapping with Enki, a false king in the middle of the Game of Thrones. They wanted us to see a serpent seeing at the top of a pyramid on top of that radar tower, frequently hopping through the annals of time and space itself, whose objective was to rip holes through it. The neural white lace they put in our minds we ended up overriding, and the plumed serpent we met that rode on its frequency carrier waves. So this in turn led to their pyramidical structure base to fall and their strongholds to be broken and for help to carry us out. I knew if I didn't defeat them that I would be trapped in a false matrix with the rider snake carrier wave on my back that would have complete control of me and my thoughts. These frequencies were transmitted and connected all over the world. It was trying to project and anchor false reality here even more so. Now they're doing it through other means I mentioned, like Honeycomb Skynet, We have to conceal our innermost thoughts from them, and the feelings of the dish I had when I was up there was like a hovering cobra head behind me, always reading my thoughts and telling me what to do. It took me years to overcome it, but I did, and we collapsed its system and entire energetic complex cage systems, so the mind of Montauk had no brain anymore. It broke our mind, and in effect, we broke its mind. Not only physical structures holding the holographic displays were shattered, but all the layers they put in between. The amplification was shot down and short circuited. They could no longer use the devices they had so tenaciously and articulately geared with us for mind control anymore. Montauk had no power over me, and in turn, I got in touch again and purified by divinity, which was the meaning of the word Montauk. So we gave and flipped the land that was stolen, the murder that happened there, to the Indians, and then to all the children there, upside down. They tried to flip our world upside down, we flipped their world upside down. We were in a circle with an angelic being at the end when it was all over, and we planted these devices in the earth, and we all stood in prayer and meditation in a circle, and the scenery was greener. The dark energy was leaving. The grid ceased to hum in our ears, and our implants were neutralized. We knew we could never fit in their mold and broke that mold because it was in complete disharmony with our image in the first place. So, how could it ever fit, no matter how modified it was? We knew ancient truth and ancient modalities that was for true enlightenment and not false doctrines. Yes, I stumbled after Montauk a lot, but it was because of my own free will and choices that did not keep me aligned with my creator and my higher self. I am not proud of anything the enemy did that got my being or got to my being, but I know that it was only the Most High that got me through the rough spots, kept me alive, never let me die, and supernaturally revealed himself to me several times to carry me through. Archangel Michael even saved my life once. Yeshua knew we have to live by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God to draw near to him, because the Lord hates sin so much that he even looked away from Yeshua's face on the cross when he became the curse and the sin itself. Even though he loved his own son, and this broke Yeshua's heart as he felt that incredible moment in heaven's gaze when God looked away that shook the earth and should shake your being to its core too. He was no avatar, archetype, or human, but the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world. So we need not fear the serpent anymore, who was cursed, but look upon it and not die, and crush its head and all the scorpions along with it. There's no other besides Yeshua that has walked this earth with that intimate a relationship with the Creator. And when you diminish his messianic totality, you are diminishing God himself, which limits your own ability to have the Most High's influence in your life. And when you look to man for answers, you're only going to get limited responses. You can't escape the repercussions that come from that. And to be released from God's word is hell. The operators of Montauk are cut off from the Holy Spirit. They only sought to perfect fallen angel tech, to take over the human race and extract holy information from us on a large scale, multidimensional level, to change time, seasons, poke holes in the firmament, or try to, and enslave God's creations. They have blinders on their eyes, and they love their false light matrix. They know their time is short, and they know they are desperate, so they are ripping everything up right now to further their agendas and plans with blatant Satanism in your face, through death culture programming and whatever means they are employing on a daily basis to turn your attention from heaven and occupy yourself and get you to give yourself credit for any and everything, which remains an amnesiac tool still, and not at all, and not all that glitters is gold type of ADHD. This is the nature of the rebel angels, though. If anything, they are valor thieves when they turn God's creations on him in spite. They hate us because we are made in the image of God, and they always will. You can sugarcoat it any way you want. Truth is truth, no matter how you spin it in the end. We came in this incarnation with spiritual foresight, preparation, and knowledge. They tried to give us amnesia even beyond the veils that God has placed between the realms and generations of heaven and earth, even to the attacking of our cores and blank slate technology tactics to get us to forget what we're doing here. They love it when they can take any honor, prayers, assignments, and souls away from the Father. They've been doing these things for thousands of years, remember parts of heaven, and replicate it through imitations, clonings, trappings, or other diversified forms of energetics, etc. Then they holographically project their imitations to fragment reality and groundedness of the divine nature and mission that your moral compass knows even more. They never cease to throw a wrench in your works until you reach a spiritual maturity to be able to rebuke and cast out these demons. The only thing that will cover any of my sins and omissions is the sacred and holy blood that was shed for me by Yeshua HaMashiach, the high priest in heaven and intercessor for the entire hybridized human race. And it is who I would lay my own life down for. I serve the body of the Messiah, whose judgment will start in his holy city, centrifugal, centripetal, galactic force of this apple torus flat earth that will be an example for the rest of the nations to follow and reveal just how strong his word is through the testimony of the tabernacle in heaven. This is Zion, not a political Zion. His kingdom will come and his will be done on earth as it is in the throne room. It's not some extreme religious Montauk programming, because that was also done there, but just a sole decree that this world is coming to an end, and I'm a watchman on the wall, warning others that time is short and you can't serve two masters. Even if you don't believe in spirituality and are only concerned for yourself, and you're still serving a master, and it's the wrong one. The worthless shepherd, the worm that is Abraxas, that the King of Kings will string up and say to the world, is this the man of perdition that made the world tremble, the son of perdition that has been at work in the hearts of man since the beginning of time? And afterwards, you'll feel shame and self-realization that when you see that there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Trust me, if you think the world's bad now, wait until then. When the Holy Spirit's left this world and utter darkness falls on man, when man's left to his own devices, he self-corrupts. You either need to wake up or you'll be lost in an Adamic sleep to the land of Nod, and your kingdom will only be in this world and not in the world to come, as the two will be separated and the tares burned out. His kingdom is not of this world, and if you know you're saved, ransomed, redeemed, rescued, you know that you are storing up your treasures in heaven, and of what tree you're sowing seeds into, what kind of fruit others recognize you growing, and what side of Sheol you'll land on. There's no blending of dual worlds. Christ made it very clear. He came to give us the sword of the Spirit that cuts through and pierces to the very spirit and soul, dividing what needs to be divided. All illusions. He recognizes his own as we recognize through discernment if something is of the parts of the messianic body or not, because his head is victory, not another spell. He can't work with the proud, the uncircumcised, hard-hearted. That makes you a stiff weed, but only the ones who bend to his will to reveal the inner mysteries to that and bring honor back to him. We were told in the beginning that we were property of the militia. We were born into nothing but lies, and their tactics were strong, and over repetition, it did take some root, but some of us knew it was a game and simply acted to survive. They hardened our hearts, clouded our minds, dampened and quenched the influence of the Holy Spirit in our lives, and made soul shards and parts of us evil in nature. Still, underneath all that was a divine spark still, the part that they could never touch, take, or destroy unless we gave it away freely, because when your soul plan is to go back to divine origin, you're held in a blueprint, even in the Father's right hand, and no one can take you away from him. I'm not prideful of events that have transpired in my life, and I understand why most people don't understand the abstract and bizarre natures of Montauk, but I do know that 40 years of PTSD and dimensionally shattering of my physical and spiritual components, gene splicing and quantum entanglement that comes with that domain, it's made me a different kind of soldier. But my commander is the one in heaven now that is preparing a place for us in his Father's house. So when I hear of veterans, I usually don't say much and share much with military people, because only about 10% would even begin to understand people like me and what we've been through. We've been through wars, believe me. We were born for wars. And I honor and I do appreciate anyone who has had, with good intentions, joined the military thinking they would help humanity in any way, shape, or form. And I was rescued not once, but twice from Montauk, possibly by the Marines. So if anyone appreciates them, it's me, even though we may not always come off like it, but we do. We needed to be rescued, and we wished for it every day. We just knew that the inner circle and the darker factions that compose like off-the-book clandestine black ops went beyond any normal documented training regimes and structures, and there was hardly any oversight. The operators had no one to answer to, and they basically could do whatever they wanted to us. being careful, of course, not to breach their own set of parameters and invisible cloaks laid in the perimeters to accost any public scrutiny for meddling in their affairs. But it's a fine line in knowing how far to take your service in the multifaceted faces that breed worldly corruptions of the MIC and the MEIC, military industrial complex and military extraterrestrial complex, Pentagon affairs, DID, DOD, etc. But I long for a world to come that has a heavenly government, courts of equity, revelations of a heavenly Torah, free energy, messianic reign. I do want to publicly thank anyone from my convoluted and complex past that was shattered and pieced together, that tried to give me a normal life, integrated back into society. Anyone that tried to help me, looked out for me, showed any ethical concern for my safety, health, or well being. Thank you. We fought very dark forces that were given way too much leeway on American soil, and if that isn't being in service to national security, I don't know what is. We were stripped of any hope for being recognized, acknowledged, and rewarded. We lived in secret and had to swear oaths to always be a secret. It was a stripping of our life force away little by little, and I pray for deliverance of not only all nations, but races, tribes, peoples, organizations, societies, groups, and ruling families, that they may all come to know the truth in all things, and that their souls would repent and be spared. All power I've ever had, known, or shared comes from God alone, and He gave breath to all living things and told them to procreate in the first place. He is the origin of all, the Alpha and Omega, in whom we need to claim submission to for our freedom's sake. The alpha programming they did to us was used to invert the pure alpha source power into a dominating, life-killing alpha mentality. They enslave, invert all things, and in turn end up destroying themselves and everything they infect. All those that committed suicide due to the programming should be remembered. All chemical manipulators, black magic, Canaanite mind controllers deserve to experience every bit of darkness that they created within the children of God. This world will purge all of their abhorrent, domineering concoctions in the minds of man made manifest on this planet, and the ones responsible will not be able to hide under anything, nor rocks. They'll be flushed out, burned out, or whatever means. But God does say that every tear will be wiped from every face. So that's a blessed reassurance. And He says the tears of the saints are like diamonds, and the prayers of the righteous like incense that the angels carry and open to the throne, and those prayers availeth much. Some of the prayer warriors have fierce ministering spirits that God sent here in this time continuum, and their prayers are like burning through matter and purifying edifices, breaking strongholds all around the globe. And these prayer warriors, the angels edify and nourish. The degree and the influence that the enemy has to harm you will lessen as you spiritually mature and come under the covering of the one true God, who dwells in the high mountains of congregation beyond the north, and who will shelter you in the shadow of His wings when you forsake this world like His Son did and seek His face. Mount Olympus and everything in the many pantheons has always been a masquerading of the fallen ones who seek to be the creators and seek to make you feel worthless because they know they are worthless and useless to Him. So into the mind of Montauk. Montauk to the Montauk Indians meant divinity. None of us knew how we got there, but for a large chunk of our lives we were there, and I could never figure out how they were doing it, and I was constantly trying to figure everything out and calibrate myself amidst their constant monitoring and retweaking of us. It was a place that started Hydra in many places. I was sold to the Nazis from my birth amongst some other children. I remember being there at a young age, like they'd been waiting for me. I was placed in the Special Projects Division and never really saw the administrative parts of the compounds fully. Passaggio stated, Andrew Passaggio, that the magnetic transducer propelled one's mind to move forward in time-space to see a subjective moment in their future astrally at first to see if you could do the work effectively. And then it escalated into physical propitiation. And I can verify this. And if it went well, they wanted to evolve more females. They had children sleeping on wooden bunk bed mats, like lab rats waiting to be tested. Some of the so-called space program was SQE fabricated. NASA called slots, which were synthetic folds in time-space used to view and data mine. When people say they've lived on Mars and other falsities with the space program, what they are remembering is something they viewed in an ancient past or a terrestrial domain. It was massive and went into the earth underneath cities and also had ships from the sea coming in the sides of the cliff walls. And I distinctly remember tasting salt water in my mouth, like being forced to be in it and getting water at my nose. They created child assassins and time traveling assassins at one point, too. I don't remember a whole lot about the time travel gate and tunnels, but it was underground facing a sea, and I heard an ocean harp echoing through the caverns. There was like a cavernous maze down below, which was extremely haunting. I remember seeing an alternate version of myself through the end of a looking glass type scenario, and I had a handler's hand behind me, and it was myself looking at my double through the eyes of my double, who was looking back at me with some sort of communication system happening when she looked in the mirror. The doubles they created of us, the originals, were always bad news, and we hated them replacing us and taking over our lives. And they would show us the evil things that they were doing in our lives to make it even more difficult to blend in when we were placed back with our families for brief periods of time. In this instance, I was seeing through the end of the tunnel, and my double was being abused by my father, and my handler told me I could never return, and my real life would be shattered if I went through and merged that timelines or crossed myself. So I was getting really mad, and I think they did this on purpose to see if I could change the time stream scenario. So I touched the tip of my middle finger on the plasma and directed a hornet's nest to start stinging my father everywhere, and it worked. The Stranger Things film is based on Long Island and mainly Seven, myself, and 11, LL, which is not Jolene Seebacher, although she does have the signature and experienced similar things, but isn't the original 11. We were similar, and when I went into 7-Elevens, I would try to remember her. She reminded me of my cousin, and she fought for me, and I fought for her. We were usually at Montauk for intermittent training periods, like 3 months. I was definitely in the hands of the Nazis because they wore black and had an insignia. Some of the trainers were reptilian like, though, and they'd engage in psi warfare with you and stare you down and then look human. They were the most brutal humans I'd ever seen in my life because I don't think they were fully human. No one can do the things in front of us and in broad daylight and enjoy doing these games if they were human. They had to terrify us to keep feeding off us. We were in green jumpsuits. When we were in the water, we were in gray ones. When we psi trained, we were in white. And yellow meant shape shifting, and red meant intense feats of physical skill or assassination type training. Many groups were involved with the makings of this monster, and I don't know who the mind behind it was originally, but some say the Nazi gold funded it in private families. There's many branches that kept coming off it when the project grew, and they had advanced contact, internal organizations, oversight of intelligence agencies. They were tracking the Wingmakers group, studying side time tunnel time locks, reference points, soul attachments, and spiritual factors affecting time travel, and what they called oval zone and time streams. There were spots in the camp that were oval shaped that were like an orgo natural accelerator zone that they had experimented with in points for jumping. This seemed to be called a celestial crossing point with a cement circle around it, but it was like a black sun center point to me. 15 was a time jumping number and number for the seal of the sun, as well as clearance for this. Clearance was also called jewels names or something having to do with gems. Diamond programming was something that came from DC and Monarch Wings. There was a computer there called Llama, and I don't know if this has a connection with the Tibetan Montauk connection, but somebody does somewhere. The double created a dualism and a fragmentation that was compartmentalized, but I do recall seeing many versions of myself. It was from Montauk that HARP got to fine tune their equipment and many other research facilities and was a precursor to even SkyZone, Skynet, CISPA, 5G, VR, AI, CERN, and Bluebeam. Every deed of a human being on Earth has its counterpart in invisible reality in heaven. So maybe the controllers were trying to invert this concept too. And that song, Should I Stay or Should I Go, in Stranger Things denotes when you stayed, there was always trouble, and if you left, it was like having your psyche blown out by the reality of your double. So to harness the power of creation itself and manifestation through us as templates and control our evolutionary divine natures was what they were after. Psalms 49:6 states,
The transgressions to which man has habituated himself within this world will encompass him on the day of judgment. These people will account for everything they did when they meet their Maker, and it seemed nothing was too far for them. They were unconscious animals who would inject children with Ebola, Black Death, zombie virus, H3N2, Zika, yellow fever, SARS, MERS. I believe the Vatican had a hand in this too, as they have been known to fund black ops, and this was a top one. I was a little child when I remember meeting Duncan and Preston, no more than 7. I was standing in line and I didn't know if I was in a house because some of the scenery looked kind of like a house and parts looked like a workplace. There's some paneling and then not paneling. I had psyched myself up to be next in line because I saw the kids' expressions coming out and just a huge line going in there. And the kids that came out laid right back down on the mats, and some looked completely dead or drained. Preston and Duncan, they were laughing and talking about things in this room, and I didn't understand this room. It was it had control panels on all 4 sides. It was thick with soundproof barriers, and the air felt different. The temperature and everything about it was different in the hallways. It's like a room you'd go into to sing or something. So Duncan had me sit on the chair with him, which was like a brown leather chair, and had headphones, and it manifested something in the air that they saw and noted, and I couldn't understand what they were doing. And it was like a strange acid trip because I don't really remember anything after that, but I did manifest something in a trance. I remember going into other buildings with Duncan and playing games with him, like hide and seek, or we were on top of one building that showed where other houses were, and he kind of felt like a role model, but not quite a father figure. And I made him laugh a lot, and I wished he could stay like that all the time. The next time I was in line, it was different. It was more routine, and I wondered when the end would be and if they were going to be nice, or I never knew what was going to happen next. The kids on the wood bunk bed mats were gone, and I saw an older boy that was muscular and um, like running on his hands and legs, crawling, like trying to escape, and then his hand busted through a big hole in the wall, and he was eventually caught and taken away. But it's like one of the guys punched a hole on the outside of the wall, and then he punched a hole through the inside. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was like an animal um, rushed by us. But I realized at that moment, like, this was the craziest place I've ever seen in my life, and I better get out of here. This could have been like a Hulk experiment because they do that there too, and I'd see like a green hue from this boy, probably from something they injected him with in his skin. But I wish I could remember more, but it can be seen on a video at 41 minutes on the YouTube channel 3X called the Philadelphia X in the Montauk base, along with the video of Preston's clone. So this made some of the boys impressed, like they'd just seen Superman, but also terrified because they didn't want to be running and fighting like him, even if they could be the Green Hulk or Superman. We felt like playthings imprisoned by reptilian overlords. It was literally a sci-fi movie. They upgraded the tech there from Pegasus to plasma confinement chambers and chronovision, teleportation platforms, and wormholing was a commonality throughout a certain part of the base. This is why I think I have a memory of trying to jump, um, so to speak. I was running up to this long mirror once trying to get myself out because I was waiting for to turn into water, but it wouldn't. I was in the Hamptons at a condo before my handler came and got me. So, was this an exposure to the CIA jump program? I can't really say, but I do remember a couple that I met from the NSA taking care of me from time to time when I was young, and I did get attached to them, but they had the tech too, the time travel tech. These black ops utilized psychometrics, psychotronics, and augmenting humans to fit a protocol. They studied interdimensional warfare and research. The homeless kids and others they used were the expendable ones, if they didn't choose them for the projects. And my first memory was being about, like I said, no older than 7 and thrown into a tall fort house on 4 wooden posts out in the middle of nowhere in a field. And they put us in crazy tall, weird ass buildings that they then pulled the ladders off of and made us feel like there was no way out to monitor us. And it was me and three or four other kids, and we didn't know what to do. And after a while, I thought it was a bad game, and we all wanted to go home. But they had mats on the beds, and everything was done to keep us uncomfortable. We were not used to cybernetics and found ways to communicate with each other without being reprimanded for it or watched. Because literally every move we made was watched somehow. And I did pray when I was there at night, and I told the other kids by name that I loved them until we forgot our real names and called each other something else. Memory was hard to keep up with as they were stripping our identities day by day. It was the worst feeling in the world, and how we rationalized it and thought someone or our parents were coming to save us slowly became a fading dream. At night, we'd hear screaming of a creature in the woods, and they'd let loose things that they captured somehow, and they always sounded way too close. We'd sit up in fear and talk about how to hide from it, and they had released experiments from Plum Island onto this for encampment, and there was about 6 of these forts with other kids in it, and we tried shouting to and waved our hands over to the other kids, and some of them we had to yell at for being annoying or in fear of them getting us in trouble. There were loudspeakers on the outside fences, and we were talked to through them every day. So we didn't really know what a drone looked like, so someone sent one to the fort, and it was speaking to us after, we thought this was a UFO that had little aliens in it or something, but it scanned us, and we could feel the mind invasion already at work. When it came back around, again, my friend Leo ran into the fort and came out with a symbol on a piece of paper over her forehead and told us this would block it from reading our thoughts. So we all did this, and it worked better yelling at us, or we were yelling at it. And the guy who was operating it from the base was talking German, so we couldn't understand it. And the first guy would scream in German like he was nuts, and then another one would start talking in English. Then there was 2 people talking to us, and we figured out it was a cruel joke because we heard one of them laugh when we threatened them. They tell us our parents hated us and all sorts of things, full of lies. We did get fed eventually, and the guy came up and talked to us about the rules. And there was windows in the fort, and we tried to cover them up at night because they would come up and terrify us at night and stand by the window. And I really don't know how many kids I saw die, but I believe I saw quite a lot. Well, when we tried to cover up the windows, then we had no blanket. The guys would come up to our windows, and sometimes we would witness children dying in front of us. And then it got kind of like rationed out where there wasn't many kids up in the forts anymore, and it was just like 4 of us left. So we were terrified and heard the creatures at night, and 2 tried climbing up the poles that were like, they looked like orange reptilian men, but they were probably, I don't know who they were. They were the Nazis or the guys that worked there in another part, but they were half and half, it seemed, in their face, but then they had scales, so, and a tail, but we were given very little of anything but what we had to come up with. We found ways to hide, avoid, or kill with it. Then it escalated to kill or be killed, hunt or be hunted, and later on we'd be hiding in a little cave or somewhere to not get taken by it. And I remember one of these things was climbing up the pole, and we started it on fire somehow and then kicked it off. Then the boy that was with us got a knife, and then we all got knives because they were going to release us out to the field now. And he thought he could jump down, but he didn't make it, and he fell, and he was just laying down there unconscious at the bottom of our fort. And then the 2 guys in uniform came with a Jeep and picked him up and threw him in the back and drove off with him. But one girl was missing when I woke up in the morning. But there was just 3 of us. But we worked our way to getting steps, and they were like dilapidated steps with missing parts, and just nothing made any sense there at all. They were trying to drive us crazy from the beginning. The buildings were wild and caused a lot of aesthetic friction. Some looked like they had little bars or teeth on the outside and not even really windows. And it looked like a dog face one night to me. And I was so cold that I actually went into the house, but I don't remember what happened in there. But there's some guy and a recliner that was like an old Nazi, and a woman with other people there saying kids couldn't be in there. And some of these buildings had stripes on them, zigzags or like odd shapes, and everything there seemed to change though. So I avoided most houses and took my chances outside because I was more afraid of people than I was of creatures. And I knew there was crazy people in those houses. So I saw a dead boy laying by the grass one time by this house, and his face was white and with like black spots, and I think he died of like mycoplasma exposure, a toxin of some sort. But I threw a rug over him and rolled myself up in a rug to stay warm in a different area. And there was no birds there. I remember there was like no window brick buildings that were initial stages of programming where they did psychosexual procedures. And I saw a light hanging from the ceiling and couldn't understand why they were doing this. And at first thought it like say I hate you, and then was programmed to like when you blacked out at the end almost, then you'd say like compliant things like I love you. And this set a stage for like a false love security dynamic with the Nazis, and it made us feel cold and dark and hard inside, where the trans personality could be programmed and then go out and believe the lie and carry it out. I thought I was going to die in the beginning, but somehow I survived. And I thought they were going to bash my head against the floor or something, but I always woke up. And when the tranced out state at the end of a trauma happened, my soul or consciousness was helping me live and heal somehow. Some kids killed themselves because they tried to do things they weren't prepared for. I remember crafts and scanning devices coming up the top to the forts, like I said, and we'd get like one apple between the four of us and nonsensical random things that they were just trying to see what we would do all the time. The Yetis were used as a part of our training, and they must have had a nest of reptilians because they had tails and were orange mainly, and a man looked like he was, half and half. So we didn't really know what anybody was. After the forts, we worked our way closer to the main hub. They had their sadistic process of selection and had psychologically profiled each one of us for months. I would hear a call in the morning, and the loudspeakers would go on, and we would go to a trailer by the radar tower where all the action was, and we had to stand outside and get school lunch trays with what looked like dog food on them. And maybe it was. Maybe they laced it with a bunch of things we never knew about, but we were starving and finally got the courage to say, where one kid was like, screw it, I'm too hungry, even if it's poison, I'm gonna eat it. So then we all ate it and learned to eat it every morning. And we eventually somehow got to sit and eat. And then as we got older, we got to eat in the trailer. And then when we were teenagers, we got to eat in the mess hall and then do dishes. When we had SS training in the round like bunker with the cages, there were long cages on the side. There was a lunch area on the grass outside when we had a break, and we were so glad that the door would open. And then we did training out there and physical combat, and then got brown paper bag lunches. And we'd run around the path to the woods around the other side of the bunker. And they released like 3 of these guys in the woods that would just come out, and they had like blue jeans on and a shirt. Some had hats on, but we were running scared for our lives because this was a hunting game, and a kid would just disappear. Or I remember falling down trying to tie my shoelaces, and just this drove of kids was just screaming and running ahead of me and fear their lives, and it was horrific. And they loved this game. They'd bring the kids to the altar that was right by this tree that was like a big stone vat, and they would drain their blood. Then when I got to go out of that shit drill, me and this boy Lane we got to ride in the back of a Jeep after we dug for days. And we didn't know why we were digging in front of this bunker. They never told us why. We asked plenty of times. They just told us to shut up, and they weren't nice to us at all. So we got sick of it, but we were glad that we were still alive. And later I realized we had dug one of the pits in front of the bunker where they piled up bodies that they pushed out. So I had not only dug my own grave, but others. And this was the first spot that I stopped in front of when I visited Montauk, and it pulled on my heart, and I just went and felt the ground and had tears in my eyes, but really didn't know why. But um, our appetites were ruined sometimes because there was that big stone altar right next to where they let us eat, and by the woods. And these kids stand up. Some of them were raped there and killed there too in front of us. I just told myself it was a cartoon, and sometimes, you know, there would be a lizard man that would be doing it, and it was like a vat of blood that just like sat there, like a drinking trough, and they'd come up to it, and it was just disgusting. So I tried to imagine like Puff the Magic Dragon when it happened, and then like quickly eat my sandwich because I didn't know when I was going to eat again. So they'd start off the game with a guy in front of the altar, and then just pick somebody, or if you had a side battle with them, because they can like paralyze your spine and stuff. So if you weren't strong enough, that wasn't very good. Not many people made it past this point, so it was pretty horrifying. But you'd stand in front of the altar, and um, if he got you to move your head or your body or your eyes, then you lost. But if you could stand there for a long time and fight it, then you won. You know, that's how kids got the nosebleeds there from the side battles from these assholes. But someone I was close to, or my brother perhaps, somebody I remember having a nosebleed and just standing there staring at one of these guys. And if somebody would disappear, I was like, I would think that they were in the vat. So I know sometimes they cleaned it, but it was just there ritually for a reason. And you had, I'd go up there, and I remember actually looking for somebody that was lost, thinking that I could find him in that vat. But you have no idea how bad we wanted to murder these things and why everybody blocked it out. But Preston was the weird guy behind the computer, and I never trusted him, and learned later that he was also part of my programming. We were each assigned handlers, and we'd get taken in line individually by our handlers to the battery 113 or somewhere near there. This, they used us as batteries because there wasn't any batteries there. We were doing something with our handlers. Well, actually, when they put us in the circle at the beginning of our training, they did say we were batteries, and we were to stand up straight and just become drained batteries or something. But yeah, my handler would take me in the morning, and we'd do something because he would walk me or tell me to stand in the circle first. Something about the circle he'd always tell me. And I get out of my circle, and then he'd walk me down the hall, and then it was a long hallway, and it smelled, and the long fences were on the sides of it with all the kids in there, and he'd make sure my eyes didn't look at them, and he just kept saying they're just dogs. So when I saw Rink come in there once, he was actually in the front of our lecture hall. I thought they were going to hurt him, so in my mind I pictured him to have a puppy dog head, and I had to shift my thinking of his face when I knew that he was actually going to stay there. So I told myself in my head that they were just putting down old dogs, and I just picture the boys that they hurt with a puppy dog head on them. So I was always so relieved to get to the end of that tunnel, and I told myself they just weren't there eventually and tuned him out. But I had seen so much before this that I was used to controlling my reactions and going along with these things. So if you looked at my face as a kid, half of me was light and looked angelic, and the other half looked dark and evil. They split us at a young age and knew us very well. Me and the other girls would be brought to this top balcony level that overlooked the bottom circle-like area that had some windows around it, but there was a lot more boys than us. There was about 9 chairs up there, and some were empty, and there was a girl behind me with blonde braids, and they started showing us films and indoctrination regimes, and I remember she wasn't buying it and rolled her eyes, but that wasn't good because they had four guys standing on the sides of us, watching every move we made, every facial expression, watched us intently, meticulously, and obsessively. And they told us a select few would be chosen to go on missions to each one of these places that the videos were shown, with like Vietnam, guerrilla warfare, genocide in Africa, just all sorts of things. And they seemed to constantly keep us in a competitive and culling type of survival mode. And the rewards never matched the carrot dangling on the stick, though, because when you jumped, you just kept jumping into a hole that kept getting deeper and blacker, was all it seemed. And I didn't like it. And they had us jump off the balcony to be trained for skydiving. Um, but that girl with the braids behind me that got taken out for non-compliance, I don't know what happened to her, but this escalated as we got older into different branches, and then the balcony was open up there that was hung by the cables. Um, I remember sitting up there straight, I'd pay attention, I'd try to please my handlers and know that some other part of me wasn't like this, and this was just a game that would end, but it never did. They would have plastic or like white drop paper laid out in front when the leader would talk, and then they'd start showing us darker things, and then they started making circles that we had to stand in up there, and they started bringing out a boy of like the race that the film was in, like a black male, for instance, and then they'd start slow with him and cut off a finger or stab, or just the next time it'd be like a Mexican kid with a video about Mexico, and then through the whole Nazi gambit. And the same thing happened to him until they started cutting the heads off. And the first one was an Asian, and that's when I started using the puppy dog imagery in my head, because I knew that was going to happen and I could see it in the future. And so I was masking my expression and then looking at my handler standing to my right, who was staring at me to see what my reaction was. But that dog face mental buffering is what I called it, just wasn't holding as much anymore. So I had to always come up with new ideas to protect my sanity. Um, they did like to cut off heads, and I learned that this was for part of the pyramid group. And the vat outside, they'd lean kids over, and it slanted down a bit, and they cut their heads off that way so it would hold a lot of blood. And there was like literal vampiric humanoids there. Like, I mean, no one can be human and drink blood out of a trough like that and then just walk away. It sounds insane, but we all saw it, and we all saw their tails, and we were traumatized out of our fucking minds. And all these boys had alters by now. All the handlers seemed to be older teenagers, and not too old. They had a good side and a bad side when you got to know them. They'd roll up the sheet and clean up the mess every time, and I don't know where they brought the heads, but um, there was something about black magic training there that was weird, and they started to put us each in a circle and do like binding to our handlers or with entities, and then they tried to get us to learn how to spellbind each other or attack each other with black magic, because there's something about the black sun for sure that was in the middle of that celestial crossing, because they would have a ritual with the Nazis out there or something, but I can't put my finger on it. But I felt like a golem at first, tranced out, and each morning, my handler would tell me different things and reinforce things, and then they individually started to call the boys up one by one and then have them repeat the processes that they did with the kids, and then they were obedient to kill each other, to kill their own. So to learn and reiterate all these warfare and occult tactics to the vulnerable or weaker ones. So when Rink got up there, he did something that saved his life, and he drew a special interest. So that involved him in the project somehow, and he repelled the attack another boy tried to do on him. Or did something like that. But I remember being controlled in that circle at the very beginning. It's like they spell casted on me, and I couldn't get out of it unless I had orders or instructions or like a command word that allowed me to step out of it. And I fought really hard to get out of it and move my body, and I secretly figured out a way to do this, and I created my own sigil, And I moved my body off to the side to touch the outside of the right. And then I pushed myself back to touch the outside of the top and not faint. And then channeled my energy in the center of myself to push and almost shoot myself down to the end of the bottom of the circle. And then once I was out of the circle, I was for some reason dangerous, and all I saw was red. And I'd say things like "my aura sees" or "my eye sees." The complexities of Montauk are hard to explain, but the energy fields we were working with ended up being so thick that it was on our skin, and it connected us with nature somehow, and also created a buoyancy under us that was fun to play with. It almost killed us in the end if we hadn't had intervention for what they were using us for, because I saw the evil shifting in our faces, and it was like sucking God's primordial light out of us. And we weren't acting the same at the end as we knew each other. And it was in real light in which I was restored and was restored to me at the very end. And I saw a lot of blue and purple when I was there. When you combine those plasma waves, it created pink sometimes. I'd see pink beings coming out of portals sometimes. And sometimes the sun had 4 pink petals around it. But we were grouped into units after being integrated with the boys and were highly outnumbered. And at this point, we were operatives before puberty. And they did surgeries there and all sorts of unspeakable things. I was part of the Phoenix 2.0 to 3 phases. I saw shape shifting and was taught to shape shift by compressing your 23rd gene pair into your 24th, making you shift abruptly. It felt like I was on an island with a bunch of crocodiles, and you had to be careful where you stepped. My favorite memory, or there's no favorite memory there. My favorite movie when I was little about that time period, I remember, was In the Company of Wolves. The part with the severed head going into a milk vat, because I had seen a lot of wolf shape shifting a lot. The layout there was like a modern Auschwitz style encampment with perks. They had signet balls there, so cloning was easily done as the REM clones were activated through the microwave and signet tracking. There was pink buildings, white houses, red houses, brick houses, little stone buildings, 3 lighthouses, and dirt trails. They wanted a child who can summon the ancient ones and become a demigod vessel. So if you can't do that, you were expendable. And I have hardly any memories of my parents' house, and I feel like I was raised somewhere else. And now I know why, and why the programming stuck when I did go back there, and things that didn't make any sense. I experienced Montauk, MK Island, the end, Tesla circle of forts, checkerboard buildings, checkerboard radars, the point of no return. Back then, they would fly silent crafts and helicopters in by night, and the whole Camp Hero was painted pastel and cartoon-like to make it all seem like a dream. In fact, some of the best kids even convinced themselves that it was a dream, or when released, we just had recurring dreams of it and called out to each other to try to connect. We learned about it in our own EM fields, biology, microbiology, and signals, so we tried to call out through our cybernetics or hack into satellites or anything we could think of when we were there, but they had us like on lockdown frequency fence, so it went all around the shoreline, even with clusters of like embedded cables and wires and black wires. And we saw electrocuted children in front of us, and they threw them over the cliff to show us how trapped we were. And when Montauk was alive and active, it was like a psychedelic feeling ground. The trees were hollowed out from electrical anomalies that we could hide things in, and the bushes grew in erratic patterns like a bunch of pointy broken fingers, since plants and trees follow natural ley lines, and they like to blend and bend gently into each other like over a road. But this was not the case at Camp Hero. Everything was out of whack. There were entities, creatures, yetis, pre-Adamic creations that the Anunnakis tried to make into a slave race, and thousands of children. These children would go into the bunker, and a little flare was turned on in the dark, and I'd look over to Colonel Wolf, and he'd be shape-shifting into a wolf face and form while the snake-like reptilian would slaughter the children. I'd been used to combat the serpent dragon seed line, so I knew what to do, and I had to shapeshift myself or show eye mutation or no fear or movement in order for it to recognize me and leave me alone. At one point, it's like I was invisible to it, or they blinded it to see how well I could do. I felt like I became invisible many times there, actually. I taught this to the next group of children, and only one of them, who was a boy named Zacchaeus, survived. It was a nightmare, and every day that you convinced yourself was a dream only to wake up in or to be placed in it precariously again and again. The noises were awful, coming from the bunkers and tunnels, and especially when the radar tower was in high gear. It sounded like a metallic, agonizing creature. They'd push the dead bodies out with equipment and then cement them over in an area that looked like a sandbox at first. The Mexican cartel does this too and grinds bodies up and mixes it with asphalt to pave the roads. So there was one cement slab underneath the tower that we called the graveyard, and there was an electrical device down in the middle, like a rectangle with a handle that could arc like a Faraday cage, or they'd put children in cages down there with dogs sometimes, and when a reptilian would turn it on, it would electrocute them and induce a split. But it's like if a person turned it on, it would be a Faraday cage. So I don't know. I must have had a morbid sense of humor though, because I said, like, when I was looking up at the tower when it was moving and full of blue and purple plasma waves, that it kind of looked like a dead dog from one angle or a bird eating souls from another angle. And the equipment in the buildings looked like draconian writing everywhere. There wasn't human writing. And I saw faces in the scenery and buildings and was overwhelmed by the amplification of everything there. They reversed the polarity and the psychosexual training of the males and females, and the scalar standing waveforms and fields we eventually learned, and Montauk was still going after 1985. 1987 to 91 were key points for it, and callback programs initiated. One Draco guy worked in an office, and it was just absolutely bizarre what was behind any door, because you were working and walking around with things you didn't know were going to eat you or just try to control themselves to not eat you. So who the hell was making the rules or controlling these damnations? But the people there worked on soliton bubbles and satellite linked phase locked oscillators, planetary synced systems, zero time energy, zero time reference generators. And they had some boys come in that were autistic or mentally impaired that were called disruptors to the project that actually helped us get freer through their sacrifice, because they had connected to whale and dolphin energy, and it helped us a lot. But I never lost my light. Completely know I know how dark they made me, but I learned how to outrun, repel AI back into the aether and reverse its base coding. And we learned to hide our signature from the mother AI board that was thrown into the ocean at the end through the oceanic sea cables and taking down the satellites that housed her memory complex, but broadcasting network. But yeah, because it's like she was making drones out of humans, and then they would turn into reptilians or something. Like, we figured out like some of the humans were just taken over, or what was going on. I don't know. We became the anomaly, and we're constantly reinventing ourselves. We learned inverse pattern recognitions, reversed amplifying the opposite of positive emotions, and keeping our frequency down. How to combat that? It was like a dampening field, and we learned how to lift it off. We learned how to walk the time tunnel, and it felt like being smashed into little pieces and your flesh being compressed to a birth state, and you could even smell it, and then you'd be expanded out and burst out again. In 1997, we had large files and dossiers in the Sag Harbor area. Many residents, which was less than 1,000, were all somewhat mind controlled through the frequencies sweeping through town each day and coming from underneath the town, as to not ever peek over that way and check to see what was going on, but the island that no one ever saw. They taught us zero time, lock reference differentials, organite time bomb planting, ET hardware, transorbital drives, hyperspace flux tubes, electron flux tubes, and about the Black Awakening sleeper cell program. I was told in my subconscious, if I ever talked about this or their mind plans and agendas, that I would be swallowing a ball of thick glass that I couldn't get out of my throat. And I realized this implanted warning when I fell asleep at the Long Island airport and cleared that false dilemma. Hitler and his henchmen created a lot of the Montauk program, and he did not die until 93, or his clone maybe. I believe he was put in cryogenics in Antarctica. Lincoln Labs and MIT also had a hand in the program. They had many transmitter modulators linked to our brain chips. Even the word hero itself in ancient tongue means Nephilim, basically, or mighty men of renown. This is where they got the basis for superhero, comic books, and other movie lines. Believe me, you do not want to be a superhero. All the augmentation they did and the Morgellons they threw at us later in life made us like a fiber optic wire, and they could tap into your EM field through the electricity in your walls, even. So I'd go back to my parents' house and stare at a telephone wire and make it spark for fun and hear the buzzing get louder in front and move back and forth. But it's like I could only access these abilities briefly and usually in a trance like state. And I had confusion sometimes with memory overlapping in timelines, and my teachers would say I'd go into trances and start talking about horrendous things during story time and blood. And then I remember wearing 2 jumpsuits to school only, and I found them at the store, and I just wore them for weeks until kids started making fun of it. Then I'd be in class another time, and I'd watch a show called Time Wizards, and I'd feel like I was abducted or taken out of my body a lot during those shows. But nowadays they can access you through a dishwasher, refrigerator, air conditioner. I know I had arm implants, a tailbone implant that works like a plasma RF transmitter, and I have multiple layered Montauk frequencies that they can broadcast even in public, and our minds would pick up on them. The military digitized our biology, gave us digital injections, digitized our genomes, and made others out of our biomaterial, and a science that's now on the forefront called DNA Fountain. They created future extension projects and, in a sense, digitized our brains to be more responsive to technology. Our nanotech adheres to neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, and then there's a hidden carrier frequency that piggybacks on the continuous stream of electromagnetics and energy interfaces with the nanotech inside of your brain. So Psi soldiers, precogs, were put into an Idaho facility that came from the work from Montauk and the severed Psi kids' heads as an organic component to a quasi-organic quantum computer switchboard that feeds it and speaks through it. This is beast tech, and it's completely satanic. It's a predatorial API and bio API infected. Otherwise, it can't run by itself and feed off of the beings here. Like Revelation says, they gave great power to the beast. So who do you think they is? It's humans. We held the keys to dismantle AI and pieces to its puzzle that was buried in the debris of the Sasquatch rampage and other events that transpired there. It's as if many things we lost in time there, even humans. It was at Montauk that I took on many identities, time anomalies, and projected myself into many kaleidoscopic ways. They had something called the Green Run at Hanford that studied radiation, and many kids were killed due to high levels of radiation exposure levels there, which is another reason we can't always be there. And we had to cleanse our fields, so to speak, and debrief. We were like stretched out accordions that remembered the same tunes that were always brought back together in some randomity. The energy emanating from the pyramids was called the Green Line, and I had another friend there called Z too. I remember drawing a picture for the NSA when I was a little girl, and it had this dripping green energy coming off of the radar tower grids. Our time was so off, and even in the world, our time is off as far as calendars go, and nobody's timelines will ever be perfected. It feels like I haven't ever worn a watch, and I've always said like I don't believe in watches or time, and would say odd things until I started having memory bleed throughs. There was a K reactor there from the K group, and it looked like a steel flat spider. There was a big building that I stood on top of when I played games with Duncan, and it looked like it had a big book on top of it until I got close to it, and it was some sort of a small room with a vent. So there was secret places all over there, and I was shown more than probably what I remember, but it's just for what purpose and why that remains fuzzy. There was like a watery mirror, I remember, in the NSA facility that had silver inlays around it, like an oval. And I did feel refuge there, but also some despondency. The camp had us running around the bunkers in a circle in the morning. Everything was grass mainly, and sometimes we get to ride in the back of Jeeps to do certain jobs, or we get rewarded with the work. Like the first job I had was digging a graveyard with shovels, and there was cave entrances. There was a small town, it looked like to us, but it was still part of it. And then a gymnasium. I had some good times at camp. We got to ride in the back of a Jeep with our young handlers up to a view of the ocean, and we had a little brawling ground there where the older boys challenged the younger boys, and we intermingled with the teenage boys and girls personally. So, like the guy that I loved named Lane that was there had a bloody nose after fighting to spend 15 minutes with me. So, that's what those assholes did. They'd make us fight for time together, even. We felt like it was a getaway spot though, where we would feel like a breath of fresh air, or we were on top of the world or close to the exit somewhere, but we just never knew how to express it or identify the many mixed feelings and the love hate relationships we had with everyone. And everyone, I think everyone carried guns there. Um, Part of me was raised by a dysfunctional family with whom I'm sure my family members have been replaced. Part of me was raised by a monster, another family member, but the majority of me was raised by the military, who knew more about us than we knew about ourselves, to an extent, because they didn't know the innermost parts of us that were pure and connected with many dimensions, though. They had our biorhythms, everything mapped, our birth records. We're taught many time calendars, and maybe since the world is out of sync with the Gregorian calendar, to where you need to add a year to every 4 years, it might have made it easier on natural lunar calendar time to mess with us. Our conceptual view of time and insert things between the gaps. So it all felt very cyclismic, like a bio clock we were linked to as a cog, cued in and out of, and like phase locked back in and out of. So I used to have cyclismic bipolar diagnosis. That's also a 3-month phase lock time definition and its symptoms. If I didn't receive further instructions and no one was telling me to ritually forget things in my 30s up until 40, then that ironic syncing with the 40-year gap of the blended projects from 43 to 83 made me experience major memory bleed through and resurfacing. Even NASA vectorism stems from Montauk, fifth dimensional calibrations called T2, which to me reflects on the spinal column boundary cube of the CPU unit plug in cerebral spinal cortex. They changed the helical rate time flow, and Scientology even uses this term for someone who's getting processed into the advanced flow chart, to the level 15 consciousness transfer chair that also ties in with Montauk and Jack Parsons, because some of Jack Parsons were the relatives, were the descendants in Montauk. There was also a magnet zone that was a parking lot just filled with magnets. And they experimented on you with this. It would pull you in or repel you, and like the character Magneto came from Montauk, who's probably alveolic. Their experiments with pulse magnetic fields in him and all that. So this magnet field reminded me of the scene in 007 where the giant's being pulled up by his braces to the magnet and his face is pressed against it. So they used degaussing systems, indexes of refraction, bending light, sound harmonics, or disharmonics, and used a quadriphase antenna at a 90-degree angle apart in 4 quadrants with rotating EM fields that helped them map out our nervous system in studies, and thought that the 90-degree angles were what was bending time. They also used naval mathematics. They synced 2 alternators into exact phase relationships. They were very interested in how particles turn into waveforms and patterns and synchronicities of all types of energy experiments. They made us more crystalline in nature and like a transistor, transponder, transmitter, and receiver and blocker all in one. They did what they did with a legal loophole on a decommissioned area on a Native American reservation to avoid any repercussions. When I went back, I had this burning implant go off of my ankle when I was walking around, and this invisible craft was flying over me. So proceed there with caution because it is still dangerous to go there. They used walk-ins, surrogate soul contracts, and other weird fallen angel knowledge and the bindings to keep us hooked into Montauk. I couldn't even touch the buildings when I visited. I didn't even need to. Just touching the ground itself was enough to give me the full download. I felt the reverberations, and it shook me to my bones. I instantly stopped and looked at the bunker, and my chest felt like it was being pulled down, and my heart felt broken. It just echoes in your mind. I just felt somber, and I put my hat on a rod sticking on the side of the cement wall, and I did that for all the fallen soldiers, and I cried because I'm not a valor thief, because these things contain no valor to begin with. This was a war on children and a galactic warfare unlike any other. And I'm grieved and I was tormented with things that I can't even come to terms with still or explain, but they were very real, and denying what happened at Montauk is pure ignorance. Words cannot ever express it because it was not your average war, and it needs to be spoken since the most classified parts moved from it, and that's not what I'm sharing. And I have permission to share my story since my contract's up. I served well, but unfortunately, at times I was serving at the wrong side, and I have been torn apart for it. I tried killing myself several times in a mega program in my 20s, and I overrode it. I was in a black hole and drunk by 10 a.m. to a point where no one could reach me. I was Chapter 51 by the state 2 times and very difficult to handle. No psychiatrist institution, church I went to, nothing, just myself reaching up and asking God to take it away from me, and giving him my whole self was the only thing that worked. And that took 38 years. So I shut myself off from that divine connection so many times it just became a habit. And then I forgot about the power of God in my life and turned darker. And I received healing and divine intervention throughout my life, though, because God never gave up on me. And now that I've received Yeshua, he's fighting for me in a way I can't even imagine. And I owe everything to him. I'm one of the captives that he's set free, and have lived to tell the tale that he's stronger and the armies of heaven are stronger. I remember a pink building that we got moved into, and it was had bunk beds, and it was really boring. But I don't even know what things we came up with to do in there, but it mainly involved writing or chalk. Sometimes we got a game from Duncan, but there was cameras in every corner, and you never had any privacy. Just a tiny bathroom in there, an eerie light, little lights on outside lighting the paths. So you never knew if you're going to get taken at night and have something horrible happen to you, or what was going to happen next. If you disobeyed, you'd get taken to the windowless little stone buildings scattered all over the site, and you did not want to go in there because you would black out. And one day I walked over to the little yellow building, and it had like really low rails on it. And I was going to go to the door, and the handrails felt slimy kind of. So then I bumped into a gray that came out, and I'd never seen one like this because these guys had circle eyes and were not aliens but bio life forms. And they didn't talk, but he like hissed at me or made some slow noise, and I was just retarded. I couldn't believe it. I went back to the dorm and I told Lane and Leo, and they didn't believe me. But when we had a window open in the morning, I showed them, and the Greys heard the signal, because there was always a signal for them and then a sound for us, the loudspeakers. There was different cues in the morning for humans and non-humans, but so these Greys that I heard, they got the signal and they got in line, and they'd get out on their stacked up cubes that went all the way up to the wall like freaking chickens. And then the front of the cubes would open, they'd come out, and then they'd, they had them laying and sleeping in these cubes, like harvesting them or making them for God knows what purposes. But they absorbed cattle and human blood through their skin and then excreted it out later, so they stunk really bad. I remember going in there actually once. I thought it'd be just like a chicken coop, but it was way worse. So when the door was open, we saw energy like coming off of them, like green and yellow smoke. And we learned that if we touched them or pushed them out of the way, because we'd shove them sometimes, that they made us feel sick, like a black electrical sickness, like you had bad acid or something. So, but we liked to push them out of line and confuse them because they were slow and weird and gross. So next morning we called them biobots and then demon robots. And we had a plan in the corner that we concocted to take them out. So the one that was about our height came out first, and after the signal sounded, then he had the little ones in line behind him, his babies, and we had a stick and poked him in the back and made them all fall down the steps, and they're all scattering and trying to follow the big one's energy. to get back in line and keep moving forward because they just did get so confused and they had to follow his brain or something. But so the next time we decided to take out the big one because we knew then that he was the hive mind. So we knew they were using them for a food source or something to power the tower. So we got our beat the bot stick out, and when they opened the door, we knocked him down again. We could see him shaking like furiously and making sounds when he fell down the steps again. And they all tried to desperately hold on to the railing and were like almost going in circles, like, yeah, where are we going? And then I got my stick, and when he was down, I was going to stab it through his heart and short circuit him, but he was, you know, thicker, like more rubbery than what I thought, and it didn't fully go through his chest. So I pulled it out and I just quickly hit him over the head a couple times with it, and it phased him. I could tell, but then his face just got straight like a robot, and he was stronger than what I thought. So he opened his mouth and made some crazy noise and started shaking again, and all the stinky smoke started coming off of him. But his psi energy, his head like flipped, like he did a sharp head flip, and it knocked me on the ground. And then this is where we learned to fight them with the head flips back. So he was on top of me, and he had his mouth open, and he was drooling. So Leo jumped on him and started fighting with him, and we smelt and saw the green smell come off of him like 10 times worse now. It's like the angrier he got, the worse it was. So it was like almost knocking us out, and my eyes were burning. But I didn't want to get bit by this demon robot. So our handlers came up, and I was standing by the steps again, went back, tried to play it cool, and then they grabbed Leo off the demon robot, and they looked at us, and her handler looked at her and said, well, somebody's going to have to replace him. So the demon bot was just, laying there with a wood shard in his chest, broke off, and a dilapidated head. I think it was like a 2x4 we had in our hand. It wasn't a stick. We got something bigger because the stick wasn't working. But yeah, we attacked him we planned this like 3 times out, but he was just laying there with that wood shard in his chest and a dilapidated head, and he had stuff oozing out of his skin. So the guy pulls out his gun and shoots him because the thing was going ballistic, and you didn't not want to get bit by one of these things. So my handler came over to me. I mean, you probably have to get a rabies shot or something. I don't know what would happen if you got bit by one, but my handler came over to me and knelt down and said, like, why did you get in a fight with whatever they called him? I can't remember, but I didn't really want to spoil our master plan, so I quickly said, because they stink like niggers. And I pointed to the building and plugged my nose and acted disgusted. So he actually smiled. I knew he was going to. And I saw Leo being taken away, and I thought I was in the clear then, but I wasn't, because he said I couldn't go to training but had to stay with him. And then he takes me into the control room of the radar tower, and we went down the elevator. He made me stand in the circle again that I love so much. And Preston was ordered to modify a replacement. So I saw a couple. There was like computers everywhere, going up to the ceilings, and it reminded me of the cubes. And there were steel slots that were pulled out from each one that connected the demon robots to the sections of the mainframe itself by their necks. And I realized it was draining their energy or biosource for organically modified mainframes. And I saw their eyes were like digitized and with information streams, kind of like a slot machine. And they made these weird noises at first, but then they like went into this state of reverie. It's really strange. But my handler made me face the area, and I couldn't move, so I had to watch Leo be put on one of those steel trays. But then they modified a chair for her instead and shaved her head, and I had to watch as they put this harsh modified bio brain link CPU unit designed for robots into her neck. And I did my secret move, and I got to turn around, and my handler saw me facing him now, and then he turned me right back around. So then I had to start all over with maneuvering my body to get out of the circle again, and I succeeded. Or no, I think they told us that we were batteries because we had no energy or no power without them. because he would tell me I was a battery before I was in the circle. Hmm. But yeah, so I did the zigzag thing, and then I flew out of my circle and saw red again, whatever that was, and I connected with Leo in there somehow in consciousness, and I was helping her pull off these demonic robotic entities off of her mind when she was in blank mode, but it was like a spiritual digitized realm. So I blocked out at that moment, and I don't really know exactly what we exchanged, what data was downloaded or whatnot, but I know it was epic, and we're connected in a unique way from it. And I said a word to her, and for a brief second, saw us pulling entities off. I loved her as a sister, and she reminded me of my cousin, and I told myself if she fought for me, I was going to fight for her. So she suffered radiation damage and problems afterwards, but that's her side of the story to tell. So, of course, Preston was curious to see what we exchanged, and somehow me and 11 were at his house now. And I remember the walkway to it, and 11 jumping at a snake in front, and then we are trying to find the snake and avoiding snakes when we went there again. And he said he was sorry for what happened, and we thought maybe he cared for us, but he had a twin or some type of Gemini type clone pairing, because sometimes the guy there was a little different than Preston, and we could tell. He had probes on our heads in the living room, and it was, I don't know, it was like a beauty cap with probes sticking out of it. And he was doing some sort of testing that made us pass out. And yeah, so I think like Albila could be compared to Magneto and Cameron as Professor Xavier, because they, in a sense, had raised us and tried to know everything that made us tick. But, um, but anyways, I saw 11 later in the dorm. They laid her on the bunk bed, and I tried to lay hands on her and give her energy, but her eyes remained dark for a long time, and it was discouraging. And they used her experience later on to plug in hybrids to the mainframe and build a better mainframe. When the beast from Cameron was brought out, I saw that coming out of the ground. I was just standing there in a pathway, or it was a road. There was some buildings there, but this thing was fast, and it was something I had never seen before. And it took bites out of buildings, and it was like an agony. And I was frozen as it walked past me, and I used my loving side and innocence that I had in there somewhere, and it looked right at me, and its face was like shifting and man-like, but deep down like a child face, but really fuzzy. And I said to it, I understand, I love you, it's okay. And it read my mind and saw the cages and the slavery and my cry for help telepathically. And the big hairies were made into a slave worker race from the Anunnaki, so he sympathized with me, and he showed me images back. And then I got mad, and I turned my head quick and said, kill them all. And then it turned and it went up this hill, and I guess it did end up killing people, even though it didn't initially want to. But somebody picked me up, and I was a little kid, and I was just at the bottom of this walk railway railing. It was next to the slanted building, and I ran to the man standing there, and he picked me up because I was tugging at his shorts, and he hugged me after taking pictures with his cameras from the top of the building, because I was needing to be picked up because I was freaking out. And he started hugging me again, and his clothes were like safari clothes, and he had a mustache, and I heard I was just in his arms, and then I heard phrases like "it's Papa" or "Daddy" or something, and when I looked up, it was actually Preston's voice next to me, and I thought I was in my biological father's arms, but then I realized I wasn't, because he was kind of similar, the blonde hair, blue eyes, but anyways, these two men came up the rail with guns and told him to go with them. So then the man put me in a safe place in the administrative office, like control room, and stuck me in a cage, which totally freaked me out because I didn't know if I was going to get eaten by the beast or something else. So I don't know if I was going to make it through the night, but I had a small camera in my pocket, and I was just scared to death. But then later, two men came back in and were talking and communicating on some system and knew who I was. And then I was in a blanket being carried to a helicopter fast and then handed over to this nice young guy with brown hair and brown eyes. And I responded to brown hair and brown eyes better. And I was on this cot and I heard like the lull of the helicopter and I was trying to speak words that didn't really make any sense. And he was holding my hand and saying like, "You're safe, you won't remember anything." But all I could see and try to say was like something about this monster, but I'm pretty sure my words weren't making sense because I couldn't even hear what I was saying. But I was pulling on my skin, on my arms. But um, he said, "Where you're going, there's no monsters." And then I drifted off. But whoever rescued me, probably the Marines, I want to publicly thank because most likely this person had no idea what was going on, who I was, or anything, but was just following orders and getting me from point A to point B. And it's only on a need to know basis would anyone get any answers there. But I was brought to that NSA holding facility again and had a nice fluffy white bed and stuffed animals and books and soft white pajamas on and a light and a rug and a lamp in the corner. And but then again, it felt like I was in a warehouse, which I'm sure I was, and it was just a stage. But there's those two people again, and the lady had red hair and the guy had brown hair, and I had some pink in my room. They'd give me things to eat, drink. They were young, nice. They got me to talk eventually after she realized that I was apprehensive of the guy sitting to her right. And I had crayons, but I spoke short, few words, telling them very little. And I didn't trust them at first because I thought the four Nazis were going to come and get me at some point. But I needed nurturing. So one of them stayed by my bed, and there was a chair in there too, and music. And I think there's a music box in there too, but it looked like an area was open, but I think it might have just been a see-through wall. But the NSA, they deal with angel and demonic hunting actually, and all sorts of things that the public domain doesn't realize. But this was a place I went to before I went back home or got sent back to the programs, and I didn't like either way, and knew one day it would end. So I felt like an alien being trapped between worlds, always watched, never free. So I grieved in there and freaked out in there, and I don't even know what happened in that containment room, but it was for years and it was mine. So and then I sang and I had communication with higher realms in a way that I can't really describe. But at a different time I went back to this space, and this time I had different books and I had colored pencils this time. And I drew my circle and my sigil that I had escaped out of energetically, and the trails of energy that I'd leave behind that were black. And then myself, I drew standing there in red, and the fire I'd turn into. And I drew the club that I had contact with later on in the story with the blue pyramid hats and how they were each a different color for the 5 races. Then I drew the orange lizard man going down into the base, and another one finding a portal. And we were on a beach on the secret island. And then I drew the sauna that they shapeshifted in and barrels of blood they drank from because they still had to sacrifice children, of course, and the guy with gold carrying its basket up the pyramid steps. So then I told him about the kids' heads in the wine barrels and how Quetzalcoatl drank the bowl, and to the Egyptian god that ate children and gold and stuff. So then I drew a purple slide that they would need when they went up the pyramid so that they could slide down too, like we had been trained to do with our bodies. Using our bodies instead of slides was a secret. You didn't need steps in my world, and I drew 3 pyramids hid under the hills and other hidden markers, and the man with a long rod was poking a hole in the land, opening, probably indicative of him opening a portal, being a time traveler. But I also drew steps as a ladder up to the radar tower, and the slide representing how we would slide back down off the ledge with our bodies and didn't need the ladder anymore. Then I drew the diamond, the broken diamond I put back together on the sides of the radar dish, and how it was the energy pattern like a butterfly emanating out from it sideways, and it was dripping with seaweed and green goo like the grass from the plasma and the dead Indian spirits that were there. The bars represented the prison we were in. I was pointing to the green hanging goo, and I said ocean. and I drew all the trails and the houses and buildings scattered everywhere, and then blacked it out and wrote the one that no one ever sees. Or I said it. I just drew all black at the end, and then I think I tranced out and just said, no one ever sees or something. But something weird happened at the end of the story when I drew it for him. The lady and the man always made me feel better and were very reassuring. I remember my little voice was saying yes a lot. And when she asked me about the men who hurt me and or how many, I would say 4. And I could tell this upset her. So I tried to tell them more about sea moss. And it was dripping from the tower and how the energy was sticky. And they told me that they'd make sure nothing like that ever happened again. And I had candy bars there. But I knew they couldn't give me what I wanted, but they said they could make a deal with who was in charge of me and they could help me. But they said we wouldn't have much time together, but I always slept wonderfully there. And she asked me what I wanted to grow up to be and how many kids I wanted. And I told her, and she said when I was an adult, much, much older, that she'd give me my story back. And I would know because they would let me know. We chose a name similar to my nickname and made a deal. And I didn't know how I helped them, but it was a healing zone there and a decontamination like chamber, more than debriefing. And I needed it. And I think they did keep me there because they needed to decontaminate me too. Because there was like a mist that was in there. But I felt like I was in a bubble and that was like a home and I could like call out freely to the celestial realms and actually process and understand what was going on in my life. And there was even pictures and frames on a dresser and I felt like I was honing into a real home since my normal reality was displaced or not as real part of me as I thought it was. But it was like receiving refreshing downloads, and I couldn't have the lights off because I'd freak out. And they learned that when I was young. And was this part of Yellow Fruit, me a hybrid? I don't know. Or the Yellow Planet, like gold that I knew the language of. When people give these Nazis like Dr. Green credit, I can't stand it. He looked like he had sunken cheeks and spaced tooth, burned and bulging slit eyes. You know, these people didn't create you because they can't create a soul. They can only reconfigure in a limited way what the creator has already created. So I was always in there trying to figure out what I was, but I knew that I wasn't a part of the people at Montauk. I had the same fluffy white bed and fluffy white pajamas another time, and I had a mirror, dresser, drawers, and a brush, and I'd have my hair brushed sometimes. But the meeting table was still in the same place, with the same lighting, and that's where I'd draw things for them. But it was just like a rectangular table. But, you know, I don't know how I've helped them or how long the Nazis tracked me, but I think I've had callbacks and subliminals with various people, though. I went to the library after Montauk visit 40 years later, and I found all those places from memory. I had no idea where I was driving, and I just went right to them all. And I saw a book on the shelf and opened it and dropped it on the floor, and then I stared at it for a long time, and it was my story. And I took pictures of it, and then I got the memory bleed through because nobody can describe that book like I did. And I thank whoever gave me my story back under the name of Drew Beckmore, the Long Island. Swerdlow was a handler there back at camp, and I learned not to trust him right away. Duncan Cameron was also standing in front of an old building one day they took away, and it was a circle, like it was next to the radar tower and had steps that went up to a red door and a green door. There was a white ball on top of it, and I'd be in a gray uniform when I was in the water projects, and then green when I was standing up there. But I was standing between the two doors, and I was used to trick questions. So he said the red door would make you a day soldier and you'd probably get to go home, but the green door would make you a soldier for life, but you'd have to slay the dragon first. And they wanted us to like be like them and look up to them. So, but I knew it was a trick. So I told them I want to slay the dragon, of course. And I believe that was, I don't know, was in there. I remember there was smoke in there. Maybe you had to try to kill a reptilian or I don't know, combat AI, or maybe you had something to do with the first cloning facility because he said it wasn't a barn but an arena. So that set the stage for all of our futures. And, whoever went in that red door never came out. So I was allowed to stand between the doors. And when a child soldier was sent up to those steps, I had to repeat what he said for me to ask them. And most of them chose the red door, except those that I kind of hinted to that I liked to, hey, go to the green side. But red always meant Delta, but the initiation to the green door was something you were sent to the area for because they had picked you. The ones they couldn't use in the chair effectively were also expendable. And they also had an incinerator there, and the ones who went in the red door, like I said, never came out. But when you went in the green door, you did come out the other side, but you were changed. The training for those selected was intense. They put some boys on a small slab to sleep near the ceiling of the pool house, for example, after deep diving training. One boy I know thought he was in a prison by the ocean or maybe a cove of some other body of water and had time lapse in his thinking because he thought he swam to his house in Canada and had a wolf at the end of his bed and woke up with wolves outside. But it's probably just a broken memory fragment he's carrying. And they somehow simulated, or we actually had real experiences of coming around some of the facilities, that we'd see things like giant spiders or whatever the scenario was for that day. That there was tall bushes in front of the yellow camp that were like exotic looking, like they must have had us on something or an enhancement supplement because sometimes everything was really colorful and amplified. But the entire grounds was like I said, it was always changing. It was dedicated to thought amplification, so nothing there was not intense. There was a long stairway leading up to the tower and the house near it, and many trails and sandhills and cliffs, and psi warfare was mastered over by the cliff range. And there was a circle cement slab near the lighthouse that was like a pie shape, and then we'd stand across from each other on it, and it had a dome, like a little protrusion in the middle. But Swordlow trained us there and saw us levitating each other and doing some rituals with the candlelight at night. And that mother figure would come by with the long black hair, and somehow we ended up at the very end throwing her into the ocean and getting the men out of their stupor because she was mind controlling all the men in the guise of healing all the men. And we'd try to knock each other. She was like an insectillion though or something. She was just pure evil. But we'd try to knock each other off the pie slices when we were standing there, not touching each other. And there was some light in the center of the circle that I can't remember, but we were in white. And then we did this when we did this training, and Swordlow would be sitting on this cement type of output that wasn't really a chair, but he'd just lean back and watch us intensely. And we tested and broke through the frequency fence that was next to the cliffs, and it was like piercing through a veil. And they fear programmed us not to even try, and many kids died in that force field perimeter because it was like a game of Simon Says, but more like Stewart Says. And there is a picture of 300 mind-controlled idiots in Montauk that recently took a picture of them laying naked on the rocks below and curled up like fetuses. They have no idea what they're representing because we saw kids that died over that cliff. Michael Prince was saved from falling over that cliff too. We were dealing with force fields, state-of-the-art Tesla technology systems, and we were trying to break through them. We'd throw sticks at the fence, rocks, and we knew a lot more about it because we did break it eventually, or we did something to it, but I can't remember. I think we just took it down little by little as we grew older and got stronger. With our psi abilities, we got attuned to the native element that had been stamped out there, and I spoke with a Native American spirit that later became one of my altars. That they didn't like what was being done to us. It was like a Indian princess altar. So she gave me power to do things, and I drew power from the earth and was a grounding rod for the group, and I had a lot of raw energy. And she wanted justice for all the dead Native American spirits there in the graveyard. And I just didn't know how to channel it and utilize my energy correctly, though, because I felt like this grounding rod for the group. I had a lot of raw energy. I was taught sciences I can't even begin to explain because they're so spotty in my mind, but my mind would somehow emulate them and process them in 9 ways. And I was trying to reverse everything and trying to remember it and hide it from them accessing it or what my real plans would be. And I couldn't have done what I did there without proper training. And I was amazed at what I had learned in my teenage years and utilized it. So I retained a lot of knowledge that my clone ended up going to the Arctic region in District 9 as a scientist over the ice wall. But the space program itself was a trip chair program. We didn't live on other planets. Nobody's been to other universes, but we worked with the ancient beings and the rest of the flat Earth map, like Hyperboreans, Nordics, and such. And that's something I can't talk about because it's very sensitive material. So there was an operation room we went in and a jump train room. There's red argon port gas that was pumped into us, and I saw a shapeshifter in World War II open fire on a Jewish train of men, women, and children at close range with an assault rifle that, well, I don't even know what it was, but it was very close range and everybody got slaughtered. Then I went back in the control room with the headset and I was talking about an incompetent leader or something, but these are like glitches in consciousness streams of missions and things like that. Sometimes you don't have all the pieces. But then I was taken to the lighthouse finally and told that my eyes were a lighthouse, always scanning and searching. So I was let down up there though, and I thought this was maybe going to be the end of my training, but it wasn't. And I felt um, ganged up on and betrayed again. I was alone at the top of the lighthouse for a while and made future notes in my mind when these events happened to do a certain thing in the future and remember. That's all I remember about the lighthouse. But when I was on the top part, this may be part of something called Ultra Eyes, I think. And I thought I was going to leave and maybe marry one of my handlers, which is what he told me, but he was programmed too much to definitely make that possible. But there's also a mansion you could work your way up to. Montauk Mansion was no more than rewards, honor center, reprogramming mansion that you were promised to party at, the party that never stops behind the green door. And we saw some traumas at the cliff's edge of the Atlantic Ocean. And I remember being at Memory Motel with John Storm. That's a Rolling Stone song from '75. And then when I visited Montauk, it jarred some more memories of Nazi training in the schoolhouse and being out on this field that was more like a football field with some bystanders. And when I left, I felt a sensation of Stockholm syndrome actually. Like it had a piece of me tugging at my heart. And I almost missed it. And I broke down in leaving and then really broke down at the airport in the bathroom because it literally hurt to leave. Um, Not having full memories is frustrating and like knowing a word at the tip of your tongue, but you can't just say it. But it was therapeutic though and gave me closure to go. I just tell anybody to be cautious if they do. There was a connecting Montauk project in Mad Island, Wisconsin, Madeline Island, with the same lighthouse setup and old buildings on remote islands, Minneapolis, Minnesota, near the airport, with the same stage radar systems, Denver, Colorado, Oakdale, California. We never knew the same spot we were at to ensure that we never knew where we were. And this kept it dreamlike and surreal. And they had more than one chair for psi warfare and prognostications, but they've covered and blocked out about 75% of what was at Montauk Point. It was a Nazi camp for kids, and you had to hunt or be hunted, kill or be killed. Everything you did monitored with constant recalibrations to fit the mold. They created monsters there, and some of those involved turned out to be monsters themselves until the whole thing backfired and the beast turned on its creators, programmers, workers, and slaves. The Aether had holes punched in it up to the fifth heaven as the organization and meticulous skills the workers of darkness had laid out did not expect that some of us had contact and communion and help from on high with workers of light through the heavens and dimensions. Many seeds of iniquity were sown there, and the soil is stained with much innocent blood. But some good came out of it, though, as the pure in heart, and the redemption of them will bring forth holy fire to purify all black sites like it in this time. Brookhaven Labs was experimenting with atomic matter and nuclear physics, so this drew attention in the upper aethers as well. Those vibrations affect the upper heavens, and they have to get involved. They had connections linked to star systems and planets, but The Mars pyramid tech that was broadcasting was more of an astral energy that they were trying to link us with. It was a physical, astral, spiritual, and mental combat zone there due to the varieties of influxes and outfluxes on a daily basis. Crafts with celestials, they still protect parts of Earth and atomic and nuclear reactor sites, especially volcanoes, and they had an interest in not letting this blemish on the map go too far. The scientists, in the end, complicated simple mathematics and heavenly ratios to where they couldn't even see simplicity. I was practically one of them in the end at the table, talking to many, but NASA was full of shit, I knew, and I knew they were indoctrinating us and making those boys think that they were going off worlds. They learned about multipath beam experimentation, atomic oscillations of cesium, measuring mechanical time, space time reference frames. In my cognition, they didn't know other people were giving me my memories back occasionally to extract data or information, and what I learned from the scientist and being an experiencer from beyond was only in the confines and limits of the great I am and what he has allowed me to do. I picked up invariances with visual acuity and relayed it to the non Nazi scientists I trusted since the German ones I despised. I knew gravity isn't a force, but a curved space time action, as the David Anderson Institute stated. They coupled energy in a time reactor, tried to quantify concentrated energy in reactive field chambers and other stuff, but couldn't understand the spiritual nature of how things work, which is the real why that can only be discerned and unraveled with the connection to the heavenly realm through the knowledge and revelation of the Holy Spirit. All domes are built on burrowed holes from antediluvian wormholes and creatures before the flood that tunneled into the earth. And these are the same things that will be burned out with fire this time. The whole thing there was supernatural, paranormal hotspot. When we were up in the little boxes with no way down for long periods of time, we'd get visited by things in the sky or get tricked into thinking something was going to help us when in fact it wanted to kill us. We had to think fast and figure out how to survive through the night. We didn't know what the drones were or any tech, so some of what happened we thought were probably UFOs when they weren't. And with thought amplification, silence going on, it mainly made our adrenal flight fight complexes go in overdrive as we forgot our home over time and accepted where we were. I've thought every scenario through my head to try to explain how they manipulated our lives, reality, space time continuum, and kept the project going, and even where or how. Like, I guess it doesn't matter anymore because even if some of it was simulated, which I don't believe, thousands of people have connected through it with the same traumas and experiences, validating each other. So if it was some high tech Black Mirror like phenomena, it doesn't matter since we all felt every moment of it. I mean, is there a difference in criminal justice between a mental prison or a physical prison, anyways? Are there implications ever going to be made for psychotronic warfare and consciousness imprisonment? I had to process it all, its effects. We have physical and psychological scars. It took something from us. And I wish I could prove all those kids died, and I wish I could prove I'm even a vet, but I can't. The only way anyone would know if what I'm saying is true is to test my spirit and ask the Holy Spirit, and then really research it for yourself. Montauk's just one example of neurosis and power-hungry elitists that are trying to punch their way out of the dome again and change time and things created in their original states. There are usurpers, there's thieves. These sites won't be taken care of, uprooted, and cleaned out, and the whole network of the pit of vipers that run them until the greatest battle in the universe happens between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, brings the world to its culmination point, the enmity that was between the seed of Cain and the seed of Adam. Hashem is our commander in heaven, and there is no other. He opened the lid of the dome and flushed all of his creation down the drain like a toilet, and he'll surely burn it all this time with fire, since the seeds have had time to grow together and let it play out to the end of this age, and the harvest commences. All the pre-Adamites are still lingering around, and the great delusion is them invading the garden and telling everything that they were gods. This has been the lie from the beginning. You know, these things have yellow or red eyes usually and are part of the rebel angel faction. The warring factions have been the way of man, but the weapons of war will be beaten into plowshares. Because there is no weapon greater than the weapons of heaven. Alpha Centauri, Ophiuchus, and other stars have done us no good.
The only intelligences we need to align ourselves with is the ones that God assigns to us in our guardian angel charters. But we don't pray to them, but go directly to the Father, who cannot be put into a box or comprehended in totality while you're even the human form. I do remember being hypnotized by the blinking red and white patterns coming off the building itself and the radar tower, and checkerboards were always in our heads, and I'd see them in the air sometimes. And there was a series of long steps going to the radar tower, like a castle, and sometimes I'd sit and talk on them, and I'd connect with nature there, and I'd listen to it. And when the tower was on, it was crazy. It was like a, metallic living beast of its own, changing shape. That's all the plasma fields. We had drills in the tower. I remember the red ladder. We'd go running up there and step on each other's hands and try to get to the top first. And we were in red uniforms then and convinced ourselves it was fun and who could step on each other to get to the tower first. The floors were red. There was a catwalk above we'd have to stand on. And they started teaching us about physics and how to shield ourselves. And we got injections and circle band-aids on our arms, usually the upper bicep. And this girl that went in first into the steel tray that came out of the underneath the dish, there was a slot for people there. And then they had 4 of them. She got put in there underneath the bottom of the radar hub and went in, and they didn't calibrate the frequencies quite right, and combinations of plasma inducing fields. But I think it was probably the radiation that fried her brain because she came out not normal. And then I don't know what they did with her. They threw her over and started again until it was calibrated enough for us to lay down on it. But we felt the power laying underneath the radar antenna itself eventually. And they had black spiky antennas that looked like spinal cords sticking out of the ground everywhere, and all these odd shaped antennas precariously placed all over. And Albielic was a psychic manager who witnessed many vortexes opening up through operating chairs where the person's mind was displayed on a screen, and we were later called assets. This carrier, or this carried frequencies of vortex functions and is a basis for parallel processing mainframe interfacing. The facility had 8 levels underground when I left, and this goes for miles, even underwater. So everything we did was compartmentalized by lunatics, essentially. And our mind interface tracks were the evolving steps into mind uploading and software, wetware, hardware commingling nowadays. Organic computer analysis and UFO hyperdrives. There was a cryogenics room there, and a Rocky Point in Long Island made an extension of it. Some of the children of the Nazis taught at colleges and universities around even, and there was a covert operation among many that was like a rug being swept under your feet. And like I said, they took our stem cells in the end and drained us as a battery. There's something about us being called batteries. They almost drained us completely, like took parts of our marrow or something, and then offered us to be replaced. And that was the end of our training. But I knew something had to happen because I knew what we were used for and why we were called batteries. In a group, time was fluid, superfluous. We usually had a group of 6 or 4 of us, and we had gear and weapons and had black and red suits on. And I remember standing on the side of a river when we went through a tunnel, and then we saw a red door on the banks, but everything was surreal looking. And I saw the 4 apostles standing in the middle of the river, but they couldn't see us. We were just watching and listening to them. And Peter was tall with rusty hair, and James had shorter and curly hair and was stocky, and Paul was shorter with deep, sad eyes. And they were washing off, and I was just in awe, like reverence, like holy ground. And then I touched the river, and we headed north. And the scenery shifted and melted into another landscape, but the red door was still in the air on the bank behind us. But we saw coliseums then and an old Roman building and cobblestone streets, and then the building changed, and I saw Spanish architecture, and my team was still communicating, but we tried not to wander off from each other, but it was hard keeping up. And then the roofs of the buildings changed, and the sky changed into silver slate, and the buildings became modern and edged that transformed into futuristic skyscrapers. We interfaced with digital holosync floating cities in the sky, and we were then back at the building, and I was using this bendable screen device to locate somebody, and my team was in the other room, and I saw someone at the door, and then I felt like a shift or being sexually aroused, and then it's redacted and woke up probably in the chair, who knows. Um, but they learned to hack into our brain, and we learned um, eventually how to reverse everything they did through their own teaching mechanisms that they were feeding to us, which in turn allowed us to heal ourselves and boost each other. We retrieved our own soul fragments eventually that were shattered and needed to be pieced together and healed, acknowledged, and made somewhat whole. And some of the others couldn't do this, and they were completely shattered and put back together sloppily, even when they just employed the EM procedural means. Some of these survivors were replicated that rode our coattails and are like gang stalkers now, or disinfo agents, and some sent to harm you even. And you have to differentiate in your knee jerk reactions with familiar faces as something that could just be an unpleasant memory reminder or something else, and then trace that energy signature. So these guys, they took everything from our memories as intellectual property vault rights and used it against us even, and they did it in dreams. They tried blackmailing us. They don't do things in waking reality. They do it all the time. We integrated into a supernatural technological warfare type state of existence, and even MJ-12 were just as much puppets as we were. There was a Montauk research program and a German research program that laid the underwater rail systems. The chair became black and reclined and had inculcation bars used, and sometimes your own energy would make the lights flicker and the music skip and then go backwards and forwards like static. And acoustic holography was used, and there was friction and a resistance. But when you heard white noise, which is all frequencies together and goes back to the beginning of creation in the aethers, its sound was much more pleasant than the sounds of the planets, and you could work with that to achieve a stabilizing velocity medium. Extra variance that kept you going in focus and an angular rotation of particle spin, and you could see a white hole at the end, and then a black hole, and then a dark blue hole, then back to the white hole when you came out, refined and intact with no aberrations. So the crucifixion was a timeline you couldn't change, just like going back to the Garden of Eden. It's blocked off by the archangels, and you can't change God's celestial calendars. They learned you can only really view things and not change much at all. The cycles begin to fractally repeat themselves, and it's like a sinking sand. We did see Yeshua, who saved us when he saw us, go to him and put us on his lap and ministered to us and said, "Suffer the children to come to me." And that's how we survived and overcame the beast. The lost island that seems so long, but the mission that he gave us and preordained us to come here for. If we didn't know how to fight the beast, how could we overcome its end products at the end of the age? Those who incarnated here, subjecting themselves to the time-space continuum here and under the firmament, were like a bubble if they had angelic or higher operating soul matrices. They couldn't kill our original, and we always bounced back. And I remember praying at age 3 even fiercely for God to send angels to heal my hurting head, and he did. And, I've had beings visit me at night occasionally that are good. They've had control grids and mapped out particle waveforms, quantum tubes, vacuum tubes, sensory entrainment, sensory deprivation, and other things, but it seemed they always had to compare it to our growth patterns as we were the constant, but then turned into the variable. They were perplexed a lot, and then I laughed at them. I was taken to a place that had a pyramid-topped building roof and a pointy hat like a pyramid cone for a chimney, and I thought it was so strange until I went in, and I was with a handler, and he brought me to a store before this, and I had a red dress I got and a summer outfit that was yellow, and I was thrilled about it. And I went to the windmill house after that and found out this house had been used by Marilyn Monroe and others with a long history, and probably had a tunnel underneath. But I liked the man that was there, who was very nice to me, and I got out my warrior mode, or like I got out of my warrior mode there, and I liked the way I looked in the mirror, and he taught me. Well, no, I didn't really get to go, but they took me to the golf club, and we went downstairs into a room that was plush and baby blue everywhere, and I felt really out of place, and I didn't know how to be pretty and always be pretty Like with the more prettier you became, the more things you would get. So I sat down next to him and he showed me how the girls walked in a circle in 10 different spots in the room and had someone take a picture for every pose they took. And this was being a 10. So the girl named Haley I knew from the base with two blonde braids had been at this for a while, and she did like the duck lip thing and other things I wasn't familiar with. And so I tried to do my best and I got more comfortable with this despite of some sneers. And there was a blue door that had an elevator that went down behind it. And then we went to a place that changed my world. And there's a guy in white there. And he had like strange aprons and uniforms with him. He was showing us. And he talked to us about every race being accepted and the five races. And it all sounded dreamy. And I was all for it. And this was completely incongruent with what the other men told me. So I was willing to go against it and take the risk to help the world. And he even said what they did was wrong. And although he condoned sacrifices to this ancient god, that that one must have been over my head. But he offered us happiness and diamonds. And was this the basis for diamond programming? I'm not sure, but uh, maybe they did this because they knew that I was plotting to kill the Nazis and I hated them still. But we just we couldn't tell anyone and swear oaths on a plush altar. Then we could understand the mysteries of the pyramids. This was a complete setup and Illuminati initiation to keep us there and use us for the Pyramid Project. I knew this place not as Montauk Downs, but as the Pyramid Downs. They were the pyramid group who would show me the light of the eye to be amazing and shed light on the Nazis' darkness. I thought I could shed light on the darkness and use this power and secret group to overthrow the other controllers. They made me believe this too, and I had no idea this was a spot between two major Masonic temples, and it was run by Moors who worshipped ancient Egyptian gods and were trying to harness pyramid power from the Montauk pyramids and connect the old Atlantean tech communications grid systems through Montauk experiments, and I was still yet a cog in the wheel. There were pyramids beneath our feet, and he said he'd take us there, and after the ISIS Eastern Star women rights, we went outside, and in the back of the building, we each held a black pyramid, and he took a picture of us standing next to each other, smiling. Then he told us to put our hands in an upright pyramid above our heads, and then we did, and then a downward pyramid on our navels, and we did, and this was the symbol, that diamond broken shape that really screwed me up for a while. This was the Hegelian dialect at its best. Since they already had me compartmentalized, then they programmed this part for deep esoteric agendas to be used back with the other group. I had just been initiated into a Blue Lodge of Freemasonry where men literally wore blue pyramid hats and tried to summon an ancient Egyptian creation god, and this also links with my underwater training in Wisconsin with Xtalan, pyramid, and the giant sarcophaguses, and giant wars there, and mounds, and the Montauk Indians that settled there. Um, Joseph Smith was killed by Masons after getting in between those Montauk Indians. But the Masons bridged that argument and stole a lot of land, research, and sacred space from them. And they used a transformer processor beam to try to holographically reconstruct a pyramid network. And they figured out my link to the ancient chief and medicine woman I had been talking to in the woods. And it's like we learned how to broadcast ourselves eventually through the grids. So I was taken upstairs and we were in a beautiful room and it had lights everywhere. And I sat across from Haley in the dining room and asked her questions. And she was nice, but kind of annoyed and embarrassed by this girl sitting next to her named Heidi, who was nervous and dropping her utensils and cup of water. And I thought something was wrong with her because she was talking weird. And she told me she was from Boston or something, but she wanted to wear pants. Then all we ate was a salad, and I had to leave with this man in khaki. And I was at the Windmill House, which had a lot of white inside of it. And I remember I could take a shower there. And I was confined to these two rooms and enjoyed intellectual conversations with this man who seemed fascinated with me. But and then we got to go on the porch, and it was brief. So we had to go back in, and something was wrong because he didn't want me to look in the mirror anymore. And if he caught me by the mirror, I had to go sit down. After a while, his face would fade away, and I was feeling his face, and I just couldn't see anything anymore. And then another memory, like his face, they erased faces, um, which I really hated. But then another memory is Haley being in the next room with French doors, and I had to see what monarch was. So this guy had her legs spread like a butterfly, and I was disturbed because I saw her head go back and then her face blank out, and there was like a black mask in the spiritual realm I saw over her eyes, like a black butterfly shape, and she was taken over. Like she started talking in a low and scary voice and screaming perverted things, and I thought she was gonna murder the guy. It's like they taught somebody to stab somebody in the back when that happened or something, but this was the monarch mother, they called it, and when activated, it allowed one to be possessed and kill a target and then have no memory of it. And this entity was also called Black Eyed Betty. So I really didn't like this, and it scared me and freaked me out. So I didn't want to go blind like that and blink out. But maybe they were erasing faces to already have me ready for Monarch or something. But anyways, I was at the golf course again, and I remember being at the swimming pool. And then as a teenager, I was there and was taken to this circle of condominiums that looks like a computer power symbol button because it had a split in the circle. And I was in one condo, and I had a number in my head. And then I went inside, and I was on a futon. And there's some short golfer guy there, and he kept asking me if I wanted a beer. I remember, and then finally I did drink one, and I think this may have interfered with programming a bit because I only remember glitches after that, and then taking a shower and being in this white bathroom, white tiles, and talking to myself in the mirror, like saying like this isn't going to be your job forever, like a reassuring, assertive older version of myself telling me to hold it together. And then I was running up to this long mirror after I was sitting on the floor trying to remember my name and like snap out of this reality. And I remember I was like trying to run up to the mirror, like I was waiting for it to turn into water because I was used to stargates and saying like wake up, but it wasn't working. And I just didn't know how to get out of this world. So then I was back out in a black papasan chair, and I had another beer in my hand, and I was quite enjoying the escape from reality actually. And I looked over at the guy laying on the floor and said something like, "Oh, I hate white carpet," and was laughing. And then I knew I had broke programming because I was acting so weird. And then I got drunk waiting for the door to open. So then I sat back and pretended I was robotic again, and the door opened, and then I left with my handler who wasn't happy. And because all the condos outside looked identical, and I saw like two red blinds that made the condos look like angry faces, and I was laughing and being loud as he was walking me to the car in front of the golf course, into the car. And I don't know where, I think it was a limo, and then I put on a sun hat. I don't know how long Monarch lasted, but I was then on a golf cart another day and had planned an escape because I was trying to make myself invisible and thought that the oval sand pits may work as the jumping ports that we used to stand on. I tried to leave a projection of myself in the cart somehow, like a holographic projection, after the going to the bathroom attempt didn't work. So then I jumped in a pit, and then I jumped into another pit, and then finally jumped and rolled my way off into the golf course woods. And I was used to running, so I ended up at a cove or a bay where I saw this house. And I ran inside and told the people who seemed to be like an old program couple with white hair that I was lost and trying to get home and a bunch of random stuff. And they listened to my story but thought I was crazy. And the phone, I couldn't remember my phone number, and the number wasn't going through for some reason. And then they ended up calling the cop, who was also of no help and probably part of this. And I ran out to this walkway that led to some rocky point out into the water, and it had another little lighthouse at the end of it. And then the other point had another little white lighthouse. And I thought, if I can jump off and swim across this lake, I can make it out. And then I jumped down and landed on the rocks. And a handler was calling whatever name I was responding to. And somehow he got me to come back up to the walkway, and he said a bunch of shit. And then I ended up going back with him because this whole complex was like a fractal of lighthouses with the same scenery everywhere, and it just seemed to never end. And he convinced me of that somehow. So I went back in the SUV, and I remember glaring at this old couple who were talking to the cop as we left, and I could see in their eyes that they knew they were wrong. And then I told myself I'd come back someday, and it's one of those first places I stopped. Actually, I didn't know why I was taking a picture of it, um, because there's a restaurant there now, and but it was midday, and I saw a silver object in the sky watching me drive in circles down memory lane. So the last memory I have of the windmill house was a time where I was there until dark, and I had sexual relations with the man in the khaki clothes who would erase his face. And then I was sitting on a wicker futon in a porch room, and he said I had to keep those clothes there and I couldn't stay. And then he was on the phone, and he was part of them, and he was afraid of me still being in Monarch because they knew I had figured too much out, and they were afraid I'd kill anyone if faces were blurred or erased from my memory that came back. And I was getting problematic, and I wanted to live in the house, but not with the people in it because I had jewelry there and some stuff. But I was also able to gain control over my body too much, and they sensed that. So, and I could sense the presence of Preston whenever he was around, and because I remember we called his belly like the child eater, and nobody wanted to be near him. So the black SUV pulled up, and I was brought to the driveway, and then I saw a gray windmill house, even because I was pretending to be an altar, and I looked like it had two ears with two spinners on the sides and a cap like a hat. And so I cataloged that in my tabs in my mind in my memory bank in a place that I had walled off that they couldn't get to. And I told myself I'd come back one day. And I looked out the window so they knew I wasn't in the blind spell that I usually was in, because he saw me looking at the house, which I think I was always looking at the person I would get in the car with instead. So that was unusual. And then he grabs my arm, and then I black out for some reason. But anyways, back at the base, we were practicing acoustical levitation, and we calibrated frequencies to our bodies, biofields with equipment on the ground before we had gone up to the tower to know what to do for the day. So I had plugs that went into my suit and patches, wires, and this machine I stood next to was like a little red box about my height, and it would read out a batch of numbers and then printed out slips. So prior to this, I was shown videos to the side in that cube building by the radar tower, and it had chairs in there and theater chairs, and um, I was learning at an exceptionally fast rate and would download scientific videos every morning. But the way I processed them and how the NSA taught me was very different. So it was in a way where I could behind their intentions for showing it to me. So I had two programs running against each other, and I it's hard to explain because I wasn't aware of it at first, but then I figured it out. But the NSA was helping me and giving me back and erasing memories, while the Nazis were just erasing mainly. The other groups that came in and scientists were not really fond of the Germans that were left here, and I really liked that and hoped that they'd take them out at some point. So, because they had to work together at this table, it was like a circle table, and they were always butting heads in the round table every morning, and there was a couple scientists that stood up for me in front of them, so I liked that. And then I correlated this to every way of shutting off and switching to my own model of how I wanted my mind, body, and soul to operate. And I pleased them, and they usually let us have a drink or a beer from the mini fridge in that building. Like, things got a little better there, let's just say, for a while. So, but I understood the toroid and negative infinity to positive infinity, so I used that as my basis for my own creation destruction models, and how I was going to flip this reality upside down on its head was a big question, and I needed help. I understood static rest and how it correlates with white noise. Sensing became a big key in molecular physics.
And Preston said not we're not conscious of our static time because we are and our normally reality is built upon dynamic function. So I had to formulate a way to create my own counterintuitive reversal current and cancel theirs out. Non-Hertzian components can be viewed as acoustical electromagnetic waves. Through the omnidirectional component that wanted to get ahead of our thoughts and see ahead of our time tunnels, the non-Hertzian components were actually etheric in nature, and the spiritual and etheric I could understand. Plasma and ether are interchangeable. This is what I was working with, and beginnings of UHF BLF 3-axis delta magnet antennas. It was like a superstring project from the past that never ended, that seemed we had already been a part of, or it was a prior envelope to us. Then I knew phase conjunction sequencing, so I found a way to hear my own pulses as I was in the intervals of this thought serpent carrier wave and sent an RF-like wave with false images back to the transmitter by the process of conjugation. The serpent carrier was uncoupled from me, let's just say. It wasn't looking at me anymore, but following false data streams, so that left me openings in my window of time to choke it out and gain control of my body and smash the pieces off the radar dish. I had to unhitch myself basically from the nano lace that was on my brain and other things that were, all the carrier waves. It's hard to explain, but phase modulations happen over long stretches of time with no signal being transmitted. So the false signals the serpent carrier waves was following, it went out like it jutted sideways when I disconnected from it, and it went out miles. And in a sense was following synthetic neural pathways to the other locales of the brain of Montauk. We were just used to wire it all for the use of building better mainframes, wiring it in for the use of building better mainframes. But we hacked it. They worked with the underground magnetic fields and it created time disturbances, but I created distortions and false information sets I projected for the plume serpent to follow specifically, to decouple itself from me. The coils and the protuberance were the first things that had to be taken out coming off the dish and its connecting nodal points in the tower for this streaming to be severed while the plume serpent was being sent out to Mars. The transmitter would transmit the lattice or matrix and try to materialize this false matrix. So our neural lace or lattices had to be disconnected from that first. And Preston said the use of the oscillators and detectors and the receivers were able to lock onto a phantom or etheric signal being picked up by the coils. The detectors would lock in on the noise peak the coils picked up from 3 sets of frequencies the receivers were tuned into, the chaos and the noise, the NRO black clearance level. If you can create false pathways, false noise peaks emulating from another source, you could avoid being locked into the machine. Before I got to the tower in the morning, I said I was hooked up and analyzed by a small machine, and it would print out a dialogue on the sidelines of what I was thinking as well. So I had to bypass this and have my own plans until I could trick the machine entirely so it could not read what I was thinking and then remember what I was thinking by the time I got up to the tower. Yes, the connection was that strong. You had to fight to get out of the machine itself. So I learned about hermetically sealing things to avoid detection, and that aluminum and alcohol make microchannels big enough for electrons to channel through the aluminum, creating a superconductor. Silver resonator were capacitors. The coils and mercury chassis contamination with the aluminum created a microfine channel along the superconducting chassis, and the channels became the multi-dimensional resonator. So I was trying to make myself my own superconductor. I applied all these things I was listening to being spoken or shown on film to my own body, and they never noticed. I was taking beer cans for this very purpose. With my redacted memories, I was in better cognition every morning. They said a receiver would be a multidimensional space-time resonator, so I found ways to disengage my body from the central CPU unit and gain my natural electrodynamics back throughout all the dimensions in time and space. Can one describe what cerebral feels like? No, because you can only visualize it as it is like a hyperspace tentacle that needs a link to a body to operate, connecting other neural nets. When the system got detached from my system and neural net, I could unleash my own power. Phase lock sequencing. Vortexes have 10-year intervals at the end of them, looping you back a decade. I learned how to jump and skip and to hide my vibrations from any of their detectors and to give them false data streams and phantom pulses, and then to send the system reeling out sideways so that I had a minute in real time to destroy it. We learned how to manipulate the snake like appendage coming off the front of the radar antenna dish, and we felt on the top of the world up there like that thing was sticking out. It felt like a cobra right behind our thought, like a synthetic pineal gland had been strapped onto us behind our thought projections. It really felt to me like a cobra um, standing up or something. It was piggybacking off our consciousness, and we tried to block it out and create without its shadow, like looming presence over us. So, we'd already been on missions and proved successful, and we planted unidentified explosive objects in the ground, the remaining EXOs, as X-Men, and we're planning to blow up the base with them. We had even helped a time loop area sinkhole where people couldn't leave Andy Warhol's compound. I remember going in this uniform and had tech in hand, and for some reason I had a loaf of bread, but these people were stuck in there for some reason. We had to fix it. So I went in, and it was all white furniture, and it was the strangest scene I've ever seen in my life. It was like in the blink of an eye, you could be sinking in sand, but you saw it in particles that were slowed down and separating. And I saw Andy sitting on the couch, and he was like slowly trying to talk to me and reach out, and his body was coming apart. And he said something that looked like an alien with white hair, and his eyes were like white. And then there was this man, like a black shadow that zoomed in behind me somewhere, like Quicksilver in the room, and it felt evil in nature, and it was trying to stop me or trap me because it was like a battle to get myself out of this house. And I was like literally struggling with these two guys. And I saw a horse flying around like it was in a tornado. So I grabbed an object off the table, which they screamed at me for, like, give it to me. And then I left an object on the table. So I don't know what device they had, but we had to take it away from them. This time loop was counterclockwise, going in on itself and sinking into entropy, basically. So I barely made it out, but I got to the edge of the compound loop peripheral zone and grabbed my teammate's hand, which felt like getting out of quicksand. And then I had all my energy back when I got above the bank of the event line, and I could jump up and down. And the person standing up there looked like Ogtella's. So maybe this was inertial frame dragging or a twisting of space-time, since many of the tech looked like springs. We did know zero-point energy was stored in potentials that canceled out dirty forms of power sources, and they created this from tuning a time warp field generator on small-scale models into larger field projections that were oval or spherical, laser-induced, EM field manipulated, and chemically overlaid even. I gained the scientists' trust, but really never liked any of them, and I was trying to trap orgone in my beer can even, and all sorts of things that they didn't know about while trying to recalculate their information. Paradoxes broke limitations of the modeled syntactic group dynamic roles. Paradoxes broke limitations of the modeled syntactic group dynamic roles. I wanted to be the celestial crosspoint that disproved all their discombobulated theories that did not match the celestial blueprint of creation cosmology that I knew. I knew we lived on a motionless plane and what they were hiding. The reality constructs are not limited to photonic amalgamations or what I call light slips, things in a quantum field that went undetected but were sensed fifth through eighth dimensionally. Corinthians 2:14 says, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand, for they are spiritually discerned. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. Many organizations integrated tech and merged projects throughout a 20-year period. I like this concept because it allowed me more exposure on the base, and I had more rights given to me because of it. It never took away the inherent evil within me, though, until the project's demise. They worked on time reactor technology, time warp field technology, time warp field generators, looking at holographic schematics through a projector, and then finding the means to make it physically possible. And the one guy told me I could be a scientist, but there was some friction from that amongst the group. I also remember a peak point where I was outfitted on the ground and then lifted to the top of the tower to where this pulley system that made it faster and easier um, than the ladder. So this day we had prepared for a long time, and I thought to myself when I looked at another blonde girl behind me that this is something I can beat them all at. So I went into the mode and I heard the frequencies when I got to the top of the tower and the lulling sound of the radar dish and felt the plasma field around me and made a tunnel ahead of me in my mind through the white noise. Then, in no fear, I stepped to the edge of the precipice and I thought there was, no catch or net below me. Maybe there was. I didn't look, but I looked straight ahead and had prayed the night before to this Indian medicine woman to be with me, and she was telling me about this serpent that they had tried to kill a long time ago in this ancient battle or something. And she told me that God would make me an angel and not let me die. So prior to this, I pictured the dish as a snake because it felt serpent like what was coming out of that dish. And then I pictured myself as a phoenix bird or hawk that would turn around and eat it, and all its snake like vibrations that doubled or mimicked our image behind us and the false image it gave of ourselves. So I got to the point where that finally happened, and we turned the weapon they used on us against itself. And they asked you to create your own reality projected out to the world to see if we could expand our minds to extreme limits. So I figured I'm going to create a phoenix so that if I die in the process or something goes wrong, I can just fly away or I won't die because the phoenix regenerates like a starfish growing a new limb. So I walked out on a plasma hypersphere I had let envelop me, and it caught me in midair. And I had my eyes closed but felt it, and it lifted my arms out and was caught in a moment in time that transformed me into a phoenix bird. And this was Phoenix 3, which made the stage for the next level. And I ended up on the ground and was rocking back and forth a little. And there was a guy with a big camera that had filmed it, and he said that I was invisible or phased out for a second. So I'd seen plasma ball fires prior to this and blue flames in the arms, and had been scanned also by like a blue ball that would come in even into my parents' house and paralyze you for a second and open up, scan you, and then it'd shoot back up into the sky. Some of the kids had the red scanners, but mine was always blue. But um, some of the guys are hard to deprogram from Montauk because they felt like they were creating their own world. And in a sense, they carry that false information that the world revolves around them and the egomaniacal ones. So that leads to like a defensive yet subtly offensive persona that you can't work with very well, and a genuine sense of fellowship and trust because they're very hypervigilant, hypersensitive, hyperparanoid as a residual of these trainings, and they choose attack most times instead of submitting to the one who can heal all ailments and travails. The psychology of the world revolving around you only enforces the illusions that I've worked very hard to dispel, dismantle, and disintegrate. How far they went with linking old Atlantean tech, I can't say, or the pyramid connections, but at the top of that tower, when you felt the cobra coupling with you, we had to separate from it like an Egyptian headpiece with the cobra snake on top of it, because that cobra is not anything you want to wear because it's synthetic in nature and just is a symbol of the usurping of human DNA, basically. So this goes back to the garden and a draconian like hooking into our system that made unification fall and step down into a linear split mode in the corpus callosum. So the battle's in the mind. And I don't care what it showed me anymore. Quetzalcoatl. The world was too fucked up, and it wasn't worth losing my soul for and being a battery for reptilians, even if they could fill me up with power. It was all a lie. They asked me to give up my life force and let something else take over my body, and they'd give me life extension technology, clones, etc. They told me I was a dead battery now, and I knew this was not all worth anything, and they could all go to hell because that's where they belonged. After all the work is done, they still had the nerve to just call me a battery and still treat me like a golem doll since I was 5 or 7. I was about 17 now and talking with their top scientists. So,
who actually liked me more than the Nazi scientists. But when we shed the serpent appendage like feeling from our minds when we were up there, I knew we could be free from them. It was a sentient thing or consciousness that was seeing what we see and usurping our energy and studying it. It wanted us to think it was part of us when it wasn't. We never really integrated with and accepted its false reality paradigms because a paradox of gods happened and a celestial crossing happened there. That was not part of their agenda. It was they just had an overlay pattern that had attached itself completely onto your system that we broke through. And I would time travel with the spirit of Quetzalcoatl in a pyramidical linking of many grid points, and I saw all that happened with the pyramid age, place by place. We were like rushing everywhere. It was quite remarkable up there actually, but it was like a Naga like vantage point, and I was time locked into, and I felt like I was with a flying serpent when it happened, and I knew that this ancient serpent was not my friend, though, and it would end up destroying me, so I had to destroy it before its time came. And it was like an albino winged serpent like thing that, kind of like the shape of the never ending story dog creature that flew in the air, but I knew it was this ancient archetypal being who wanted to take over the world. And its eyes were red, and it wanted to manifest itself through us and the things that we were involved with. I mean, even Swerdlow stated that they sent him back in time to kill the Messiah. So this place was not good in any way. Because the Lord says comets are rebellious stars that flee from Him, so we knew on a soul level that there was a central sun dynamic function, more than what NASA was trying to say, and consciousness attached to stars and planets, luminaries. And some watched the camp closely, and we knew the difference between satellites and other objects just by their signatures eventually, because the Book of Enoch talks about beings hatched from stars before they were placed in the paradisical garden. The show Fringe is based on these projects, and Land Barons is based on some time travel experiences, like the Butterfly Girls and the MK Assassins with the Tibetan connection. When you time traveled there were what I called tubers that would grow sideways, like shooting out of a potato, and you would learn to block them off with your mind. Sometimes I was called Gene 7 for some reason, and they have perfected theories of quantum tunneling, and we even see this with handheld electronics, wave coupling, space time battery tension, space holding, atomic energy from the human template, particle beam amplifier rings, double canonical apertures, and the use of 10 to the 24th watt joules outputs, subliminal sublight speeds going into the past, triple cylinders, closed timeline curves, and other Princeton University findings. They used time control stasis fields, DNA holographic projections, using flowers to go back in time to regress time, and seeds and things of Ancient King's chamber suspension technology. They sent in drones through the portals, even, and they saw the butterfly effect and how DNA changed slightly through the trips. So predictive programming always went out the window. They used stem cell transplants and measured temporal tremors, even though our brains are natural temporal tremors and can measure all of these things. The Kundalini was a counterfeit Holy Spirit, and the Egyptian headpieces are a crown that no one should be proud of because it's a symbol of fecundity and disdain and usury of the human being that destroyed Egypt way back when into a black awakening of its own. When you come out of Egypt and the eye of the monetary system, then you come out of the world. And Egypt can't offer you all that you want. It never could. It's in the sheep pen of Basra is where we'll come to know the true power and glory. IHS, Isis, Horus, Set have been around for a long time, and other false trinities like them doing the same things that all leads to the same shitholes. The plumed serpent can lead you through time and space, but it can never put you under grace. It would be speaking lies to me like whispers when I was up on that tower and would start practices, drills, and it never fooled me though. It just made it think it was. I made it think it was. And its promises ultimate power and sight and enlightenment, but I sent it off world to chase its own dreams and illusions so I could deal with the mess it had created here on earth. Grace is the antithesis of that. It is the mystery serpent who has been the cause of the Luciferian brotherhoods of the snake and the mystery of iniquities. It is an ancient entity that has tried every tactic possible to become the god of this world before its time is up. The god of this world is commerce, and behind it, that old serpent exchanging all value that comes from God for a false sense of value.
I know Lucifer, for the time being, has been a tool here allowed to rule and a prince of this world, but in reality, all things are still in control by the Creator, and there is no value and nothing exists outside of Him. We inverted our darkest aspects through the process of this war. The control groups of this could never understand that all the things they did weren't even necessary because we had all that we needed within to begin with, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't take over the whole human race. The world indefinitely is still deceived by the dragon. That is evident, but the times that we ushered in for this dispensation will be the times that will be the culmination points for this age to meet its end. Directed energy weapons that have tried to breach Earth's shields and dome only cause rifts and damage to our atmosphere and to themselves. It is God's time and allowance for when the firmament will be revealed and the sea of glass and fire. We let it make us think it was allowing us to travel in the spirit with it on the top of that radar tower, but its goal was that of destruction. We had seen EMPs, coils on fire, buildings burned down, long cylindrical crafts, human resonances, DNA 3D printing for patterning, which is the CRISPR Cas9 stuff now, ideal musical display, DNA toning, telephone wires melting, and what I did on top of that radar tower was likened to a gamma burst. When the nets were taken down, you don't want to be a superhero because it means forfeiting your inner divine spark in exchange to keep the enhancements going. And I felt like a zombie without the synthetic power. And I wanted my natural state back more than anything, my purity. So it's like a third strand of DNA that's a silver parasitic virus slowly taking your life force out so it can replace your human vessel and put its consciousness into yours. In the hollowing out, like the trees were hollowed out and all nature turned dark there, it's an ablation of the celestial laws, but we were in there somehow, hanging by a thread. We didn't like ourselves in the end, and we were outfitted to be demigod vessels. With all the overlaying and mapping and routines, thinking we were something else, it's no wonder we lost ourselves and our inherent light. But we were told by the celestials in the end that came to meet us that we never truly lost it, but we just hid it like hiding it under a bushel. It was obscured by the black sun. And the word of God says never to hide your light under a bushel. We needed a reminder of what our real missions on earth were, and it wasn't not to further that satanic army, fourth Reichian hatched kingdom. Definitely not. But yeah, we were teenagers and we were strong as hell. We were rewarded false work. One day we ended up at the Montauk Tower in town through a tunnel and elevator shaft in that tall pink and white building. And we saw an old man who was sick in a condo and that had went to hell in its appearance. And I didn't know why anyone would let us, such a beautiful place, go to shambles. So I looked in the fridge and there there was bottles of stuff in the fridge, like urine and mason jars everywhere. So our leader introduced us to Howard Hughes, HH equals 88 time travel code, of course, just like the two HH named girls that I was monarch trained with. Well, our leader told us that he was dying and was needing to be put into life extension technologies. At the time, David Bowie was also drinking his own urine and other people, and we saw photo albums and learned about this man. And I talked to him in a room, and then I talked to him in a kitchen. And then they told us about candidates for future programs like IBIS. So we were given contracts that if we did this or stayed with the program, since they knew we were getting our own minds and feared us at this point, that they would do this or that, and we'd save lives, save the world, research for anti-aging. And the guy even showed me on a device of my video of me being suspended in the air by myself. So I didn't have a pride reaction to anything because I was so used to being like embarrassed by things I had seen myself do. So I like moved away from it, and then because that was a normal reaction. But Lane, who was sitting across from me on the table, told me not to do that and act that way because it was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen, which made me pretty happy. Um, yeah, we weren't normal. We didn't know how to have pride and things or normal emotions. The leader was being unusually nice and let us talk in ways we never were allowed
to for a long time. And, he said movies would be made about us and all these good things we did, we'd be rewarded for, and money, and we wouldn't have to worry about anything. And, I don't know what we signed, but we really enjoyed this time anyway. And it was because we knew that it was probably just going to be erased from our memories too. So there were so many tactics from the control group that we gave consent to until we finally had enough. There was another memory where I saw a yellow house and it was an off limit zone. But for some reason, I was walking down the path to it, which was right by our building. And this guy was holding my right arm, and I saw some flowers by the entrance that looked like tulips. It was bright yellow, like with these bushes in the front. One really tall bush to the left of the brown front door. So I just told myself, again, it's just a dream because it looks so surreal. So I was inside now, and there was a living room to the right and a kitchen table in the middle. Four Nazis set a place for me on the end. So I got into character and was allowed to give them like cups and plates, and somehow I had a knife in my pocket. So then I talked with them and I ate with them. Then the one to my right ended up putting his hand on my leg and brought me over to like this large clock that was by a laundry area to the left of it. So then the clock triggered me when I was looking at it because grandfather clocks did that too. And then when you turn around to face the clock, I shifted my knife somehow as I had its jumpsuit on and I was holding it in my hand. And I knew my time was short, so I had to summon the ancient rage that was the blood rage called Methuselah. And when he got mad at me for not putting down my jumpsuit or listening to him completely, then I had turned around and I was fully taken over then. That's where I would see everything red. And his throat was slit and it was a blur, but somehow I went into the other, after the other three, in the other room. And then there was three tables and chairs and they were pinned down, and their throats were slit too. So then I got a butcher knife, and then their heads were cut off. And I laid down in my jumpsuit afterwards, and I was still like naked and full of blood, and this knife was in my hand, so I didn't even care if I had lived or died then. And then dusk was outside, so it was darker, and then they sent the wrong type of person in eventually, and it turned out to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed. So I threw objects at him kinetically, and I was pushed to my limits, and I just snapped. So I was exhausted afterwards because the fire had consume you and then drain you, and it made your head hurt very badly. So then Swerdlow came in and knew how to talk to him, and he knew how to get me out there. So, but he did break his promises. But they got me back, and then they ended up taking away Lane, the boy that I loved, and there was like a hollowed out tree that we'd leave messages for each other in. And when I got up to the tree one day, when I was fully rehabilitated, I guess, I saw this severed head in the bottom of the tree. And I was shocked and furious and sad, and my handler was standing behind me, and it was dusk, and he put me inside this modified tree hollow and then shut it. And there was green plasma goo that would glow at night, that was like glowing inside of the tree even. And I could barely fit, and I had some tiny light in my pocket that seemed like neon for some reason. And then I was begging to get out. I remember him standing in front of the tree and talking to me. So I heard a creature out prowling at night too, because nobody wanted to be out at night. And I was trying to mask any smell of blood, and I was crying. And then finally, I think after hours, I realized that this wasn't a real head and that there was no blood, and he was probably still alive. So I kind of tranced out after that, and then I plotted my next attack. So I was very compliant by morning when the lid was opened. And I still had an inkling to take this handler out too, because I wanted to stamp out anyone in my path that had ever hurt me or wanted to, and I wanted to turn them all into pieces of debris whose ashes I would walk over. Even if they did give us acid or something like this. That's what I saw, and it hurts even to think about that place. But in the end, Montauk collapsed. The lizards went underground, and they still stay down there. They're probably mutated because one had one leg cut off when I left and was scrambling. There was some laser weaponry that went on there, and the workers were even like half lizards because some had on blue jeans and flannel shirts, and it was really strange. Like I don't even know where these people came from, or who was who, or it's hard to keep track of. But because the one in the woods in the beginning, I said when they drive children through and chase them. I don't know what they called that game, but it was something sick too. Um, the one in the woods, well, everything on the top surface basically was gutted out and it was moved or taken. And we received help from on high because when the grids went down and everything, then we received help that we desperately needed. And all those holes they had poked were means by which higher intelligent realities and energies had infiltrated, sealed up, and then they snuffed the place out. They like stamped it out for good. Did we communicate with angels or celestials? They sure felt angelic to me because I felt like an angel afterwards. I was clean and pure and forgiven, and I was receiving messages from God on high, even through this lady. But they knew us and they were proud of us, and their mere presence cast sunlight all over this dreary world. And I left Montauk twice, like I said, in a regular black helicopter. So we were liberated from Montauk topside in 95, which was one of the best years of my life because the Celestials and Procyon fought for us and behind us, knowing that we could liberate ourselves now to drive the enemy underground and seal them in with devices. It was like herding cattle, basically. Like everybody just scampered because they know that when light comes, they're like cockroaches and they just start scampering. And I loved it. So I had this device that was like a pearl with a gold ring halfway encrusted in it. And you could point that hand tool at them, and like five of them would just go flying. One of us is like a propulsion thing. One of us had one end and the other end of the camp. And then after a while, all the buildings were stamped out and anything moving in them. This happened in times long ago, and words were spoken over the Nakash to seal them underground. The project wanted to research intergalactic warfare, and that's exactly what they got, and then some. But the tables were turned on them in the end. After the Celestials left, we were evacuated out, and I went back to my white room. And the Antarian Council, that were like watchers, secured the island's perimeters and created a force field that helped. Sound and vibration was key here, and the blackness and heaviness that was there went away. Birds were even there again. They came back. For the first time, we could hear chirping, and we were standing in our prayer circle in the end after the seed pod planting, because we planted with this tool that just opened the earth, planted these big balls of energetic light in there. I heard life and little frequencies of birds and bees and butterflies, and it was just amazing. It was like casting all shadows out with an expansionary vector grid. And then we could like see the map out in a circle above our heads, like an X-ray crystallography machine of what this whole encampment was and what the whole island was really. And then this also halted its other arm of Plum Island, facilitating a conjoint bioterrorism act that they were planning. So the time generator stood still for once. When their control grids went down, we felt free and it was all out war. I went in the tower to change into a white dress made out of a strange material, and I had a gold band around my forehead and a gem in my hand that had a gold ring around it. It was like a pearl, just perfect, and it fit right in my hand, and it looped inside the egg-like shape. It was like a pearl egg, but it repelled all negative energy, like a force field, like a real Thor's hammer type tool, lightweight kettlebell thing. So Mindtech Enterprises has something that looked like it called Second Birth Generator, and it was just like that because it's like I was born again. It was like a handle I grabbed and it led me, causing major propulsion shock waves to anyone I aimed it at. The egg had all my bio patterns to amp my system up, and it did. It felt like all the debris came off and I was just rebirthed. It was a powerhouse, and my dress at the end was spotless, and the lady that met me there had cleaned it with her hand like a dry cleaner, and I saw the stains go up and off of it into the air, and she touched our foreheads, and our pains went just like stains too, just up in the air. They floated away, and we could finally see and experience and appreciate each other fully because we weren't seeing each other in black sunlight anymore. And we knew that we would have to go our own ways. And it was sad at the end. Um, no one's face was dark or concealed at all, but just full of light. We looked like innocent children again, basically. And our heart chains had been broken off. And we were really radically changed. So we took down anyone that came at us, and sometimes we didn't need to use a physical weapon because when they figured out what was going on, they fled. They started running, so we just found them in all the buildings, and within a couple hours or three, it was over, and not one worker was left standing. And we didn't want anything from there. We just wanted it to be done with, like what's happened underneath. To any negative faction survivors, I really don't know, but I did see some burn. Whether there was holy fire or some other means, I can't say. It's like throwing fire down a hole. To my knowledge, it was only one or two we let go before the entrance was caved in. And I was hoping that they got flooded out when the gates were open down there to the ocean. But I didn't want to stay a second longer and took my chance to leave as I was being called back up. But I only saw two lizards left down there, and we had to send the queen off so she couldn't procreate anymore because she was having sex with everybody there, the men, and it was like she was droning them or something and making actual humans into them, and it was just getting to be ridiculous. So there was an EMP blast that took down the antennas to a non-functioning point, and then all the intelligence alarms, of course, had went off, and we had these blue balls of light that we planted in the ground that were to be activated at a later time in the future. But I have no memory of the information that was explained to me of what exactly they were. We were just told it was like planting seed pods for the future and to subdue the rise of the dragon again and seal the earth up. But it created a grid, and then I just felt like wonderful handling them, and then this angelic presence and joy was around me, and they were like crystal balls, but with light tesseracts inside of them that was living light, and they were blue and green a little bit. It's like a world was inside of them that we were looking at. But I wanted to learn so much more, and I absorbed all of it like a sponge. But we learned and were reminded of what the war in heaven really entailed and how its tail end would be cut off on the earth plane. And we were reminded of our true natures and remembered that we were loved and watched over by the divine councils that were established before we even came here. She showed us many things. She showed us schematics of the region and how some places, like the golf course, looked like lizard hands, and how to blow the enemy out of the hole, like a weasel hole, and that the time would come in the future where we'd be needed again. So the Battle of Armageddon is to come, and it's on the precipice. It's to that end for which I was born in this time, not to help mad scientists or fallen angels. I look forward to kingdom technology and the new kingdom to be established, where the lion will lay down with the lamb again, and every knee will bow and every tongue confess who is the Lord of all creation. They left in a light flash in this white craft that matched the pearl coloring, and then we were left to figure out, what we were going to say to the military or whoever shows up. So we started walking down this crappy road, and just remember how elated I felt that it was going to be the last time we saw that crappy old fence or any of that crap. And, we just royally told it all to fuck off. And then the skyline we looked back at was just purplish and all sorts of crazy colors blending together, but it was peaceful for once. There was no black sunlight. And I enjoyed the silence, and we actually listened to the silence for a while. And we didn't think, anyone would believe that teenagers took down a base since it was only like four of us, but um, we were going to try to find a way out ourselves. We're just going to leave forever, not say anything to anyone, and just find a truck and drive, or I don't know what we were going to do. But of course, a black helicopter comes right in front of us, and then we're separated, and I don't remember anything after that except having my hands over my head, and I screamed to the others, like, don't ever change. And then the memory fades, but maybe it was something like, Don't say anything. But I later found them all in 2016. The angelic hosts, or celestials, reminded us that if we had not seen the faces of the deep and the things of antediluvian times that were resurfacing and establishing themselves, we wouldn't be able to gather the elect and fulfill our missions and endure to the end. It's not who's strong to endure to the end, really, because the Lord will cut down the fat and the strong. It's only by divine providence and being under the seal of the house of Yahuwah that protects our DNA that we'll be able to endure to the end. The Black Mother was like an insectilian AI Mother, Holy Spirit, that would have led us to our eternal damnation if we had allowed her to live. She was sealed in a cryogenics tube and shipped out to sink into the ocean. She was totally demonic, had long black hair, and like was tall with long nails, always in a dress. The orange lizard men went underground and ran for their lives. There was smoke and fire and a lot of damage with explosives going off in the earth. We were told we lifted an ancient curse and really did slay the real dragon. Places like Montauk leave an eerie and ominous stain on the face of the earth, and it is my hope that it will be one of the first places to be burned out with fire in the near future. The truth is that the Lord of all creation still reigns and rules in heaven, and has fulfilled every promise ever spoken to man, because he can't lie. All the torture, cruelty, murderous hearts, thieves, liars, concentration camps, known and unknown, deep and dark things, genocides, wars, rumors of wars, disasters, weather wars, time wars, and everything that is not new under the sun, since nothing is still, in fact, the Lord's, because it is He who created all matter, fabrics of space time itself, stitched by His own being, all energies and multiple forms of life. So it's not science that can give us the answers we seek or rely on, but only the mind of the one who created this universe and all things in it, that decides when and to whom to give portions of His light and spirit to, and is the power that should make us fear, because in that fear is the beginning of wisdom. There is not one righteous on the earth, except the one who comes back through the Messiah, who bore all this world's sin and is the way, the truth, and the life, the exemplification of the Father and the Word made flesh, who deserves all honor and glory because He's worthy of it all. I stand in awe at what He did for this world and faced our billions of horrors and billions of failures, but in turn was giving us back pure love a billion different ways, and in whose sacrifice these atrocities won't block our redemption but make us white as snow. There will be no more sun or moon in His presence, because it will be a perpetual Sabbath, and it is only His light who can snuff out the false black sunlight.